Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. This time it's a very special live stream because we have a guest, my good friend Benny Truska. Benny is a historian, an arms and armor expert as well, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Odyssey. I may have done this a few times previously, just a few times previously. But this time I thought I'd take someone else on who knows probably about the Odyssey quite a lot more than myself, and just it'll be cool to sort of talk about it with you guys in the chat, with Benny here as well, to go through this. So, Benny, if you just want to give yourself a little bit of an introduction, just so that people who haven't seen previous videos that you've been in know who you are.
Yeah, hey guys, I am Benny Truska. I am the creator and host of Historia Hellenike. A lot of you that are fans of Adams here on the United Sparta are probably fans of mine because of him. So thank you for that, Adam. For always helping me out on that. I know I'm on a little bit of a hiatus. I just moved to Colorado, still getting used to living out here, and of course I have to focus on my job first and foremost because I'm trying to officially get my Federal Aviation Administration license to be an aircraft mechanic. I'm 2/3 of the way there. I just have one more test in the beginning of February, and then once that happens, I should be able to post a little bit more regularly and longer videos as well. And additionally, yes, as Adam mentioned, I'm a historian. I'm also an archaeologist. I'm probably more the armchair archaeologist than the field archaeologist at this point in time, but still, the degree says archaeology. It works.
There we go. Perfect. So there we go. Really nice to have Benny back on, especially with his wealth of knowledge. So Benny, the Odyssey is a bit of a hot topic recently, and it's got praise. It's got not non-praise. It's sort of all over the place. But I think something is quite clear here is that this is sort of the first look that a lot of people have at the Odyssey. They've never really read the Odyssey or watched videos of the Odyssey before this, and now everyone's talking about it. So could you summarize the Odyssey a little bit just for people here to know roughly what happens? What is the Odyssey before we start to get into the nitty-gritty?
Yeah. So I'm going to break it down a little bit as like a tangent before I get to the main part of the Odyssey. So the Odyssey, it's named after Odysseus. It's a story of Odysseus. Like the Iliad, you would think is the story of Ilium, even though it's technically the story of Achilles, but I digress. It's the story of Ilium or Troy. The Odyssey is the story of Odysseus. Anyway, Odysseus, the Trojan War has just ended, and he's on his way home. He's upset the god Poseidon, and Poseidon is trying to make his journey as long and arduous as possible. Well, in Greek, there's a word for this, the return home journey, or the journey home. It's called a nostos. And in fact, we actually have a modern derivative of it, which is nostalgia. So nostalgia also like the, I think it's algeia or something like that, but it means the pain. So the nostos is the painful return home. So whenever you get nostalgic about thinking about something, you're thinking about something you've done in the past that you look back fondly upon, but you don't really get a chance to do that again. So it kind of hurts a little bit. So his nostos is his return home. And in a way, it's almost he's thinking about home in a nostalgic setting because while, yeah, he does eventually get to come home, spoiler alert, the entire time this journey is very painful for him. And he goes through lots of trials and tribulations. So the main hit points of the Odyssey is, the cannibalistic giants, the island of cannibalistic giants he goes to, the cave of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, going to see Circe, and then Calypso, the two goddesses, goddesses of magic and mysticism. Circe, she turns a lot of Odysseus's men into farm animals for sustenance for herself while she's on this island. Good things happen. They get turned back. Woo. And then, with Calypso, I think it is Calypso. Yeah, it's Calypso, I believe. Or he ends up spending 7 years with her. Is it Calypso? I'm sorry, everybody. I might be getting this wrong.
That's okay. Just ignore the name. Name's so important.
Yeah, there is a secondary goddess that he ends up spending 7 years of his journey with. before Hermes comes up to her and is like, "Hey," he goes, "you have to let him go home." And she's like, "All right, fine." Mind you, they do end up having a kid together, but that's a story for a different time. Same thing with Circe as well. Again, story for a different time. And then near the end of the Odyssey, Odysseus gets to come back home to the island of Ithaca. And while he's there, he discovers that the young men of um, the island, the nobility, the ones that were too young to go off to war, well, now that they're all grown up, they're vying for the hand of Penelope, Odysseus's wife, so that they become king of Ithaca. And the entire time, Penelope is like, "No, not so much. I don't like you." And then they come up with a plan once she realizes who Odysseus is, and they, well, they unalive is the technical term nowadays. The suitors, and she puts them up for one more test, and that's like, okay, where is the bed in our bedroom or whatever? And Odysseus starts laughing. He goes, "Well, it's right where it's always been, because the headboard of our bed is this giant tree that's still alive and growing there." And that's how Penelope's like, "Oh, this really is my husband." And they live happily ever after. There's a part of the Odyssey after the fact that a lot of people don't talk about. Um, but the main part is that Odysseus gets to come home and he's with his wife and son, Telemachus, or Telemachus, however you want to pronounce it, whose name actually means the final war or the final battle, which Odysseus' final battle, his son gets to fight with him in when they were defeating all the suitors.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that little summary. So it's the Odyssey is also a 10-year period, right? So the Iliad supposedly a 10-year war, and then his return home is also 10 years. So he's gone for 20 years, which is quite a long period of time. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of mythological elements that take place in this. I suppose we would classify it as an epic poem, as it would be its sort of literature classification. Which has, of course, led to one of the biggest scapegoats that people give for Christopher Nolan in this sort of thing. Is it's not a historical work, it's a fantasy, is what they'll say. I wouldn't classify it as a fantasy. I would classify it as an epic poem that's set in a historical period. And I think that's one of the things that has really mainly made this controversy come up, is you have people that go, "Man, this armor looks awful." You then have people that go, "Man, this armor looks awful," especially because it looks nothing like the historical armors of the day. And then you have other people who want dendropanoplies of the Bronze Age, and you have other people who just want something a little bit more accurate. Because Nolan's done a few things interesting with this. He has filmed on location in as many places as he can. He's filmed on the ocean with Viking ships. He's filmed, he's done it properly. He sort of strives himself on filming properly. Yet he seems to have gone the improper route when it comes to the costumes. So what are your thoughts? I've made my thoughts quite clear on this in previous videos and live streams about how I'm not necessarily asking for Bronze Age dendropanoplies, which are arguably a little bit earlier than the Odyssey actually takes place in. But instead, I have absolutely no issue with him focusing in on the more archaic and classical look. I just think that he's still done that really poorly, and that it feels like a modern costume department working on something that's supposed to be one of the most prevalent and, I would say, meaningful cultural stories in the ancient Greek world. It would almost be like depicting, not quite a one-to-one analysis, but depicting the Bible with really skewiffy costumes. It sort of breaks you out of that feel. So that's one of my biggest gripes with this, is I think that the costumes just do a poor job at representing the culture and the period that the Odyssey actually takes place in. So what are your thoughts, as someone who is, again, an arms and armor expert? What are your thoughts on the route that Nolan has taken with this?
Bit of a lot to unpack, truth be told. Well, first off, I have to say my favorite and also least favorite at the same time part of the trailer that we've seen is Batamemnon. Agamemnon basically is Batman. When he turned around and I saw that, I was like, oh boy.
I actually laughed when I first saw it. I was like, is this real? Because you get all of those AI trailers, like the Odyssey trailer, and I watch them like this is a load of AI. And he turned around and he has the handsome Squidward helmet black. Yeah.
Well, and see, whenever I first saw it, I saw obviously the human spine for the part of the horsehair crest, and that I was like, I don't like that. Even like, it just doesn't even look good, regardless of the rest of the gear that he's wearing. It just not only does it not fit, but it just doesn't look good as an adornment in that regard. If they wanted to use like a human spine for like, I don't know, maybe the back of Agamemnon's armor, like when you see his back, and if there was like a human spine there, I think that would have been kind of cool looking, completely ahistorical, but it would have been neat to see. But just having it just dangle off his helmet like that, I'm like, no, that doesn't look good.
It's a
Um,
bit weird, and I talked to my brother about this. My brother is not nearly as big of a history guy as me, but he's just like the armor just looks bad as a costume, anyways. And I
mhm.
talked about this last live stream, but I think a form of media that actually did the fantastical but historically rooted armor really, really well is a game that you're a big fan of, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And they even have an Agamemnon's armor that has, the mask of Agamemnon on it. And I'm like, I feel like it's kind of funny that Assassin's Creed Odyssey did a better job at capturing a good mix between historically inspired but fantastical armors. And I actually would have been really happy with this film if they had done armor that actually sort of resembled that Odyssey look, the Assassin's Creed Odyssey look.
Mhm.
Um, so if you were going to design the costumes for this, would you go accurately or would you go, how would you go about this?
Honestly, I probably would stick to like the circa 8th century BCE style of armor. And the reason being is because when Homer wrote his epics, he was writing during the archaic period, right? Batmanides, I just saw that in the comment.
Yes, we should address the comments as well, but after you finish that thought, and then
um,
we'll go read the comments.
sorry, I just saw Paul, and I love
No, no,
Paul.
no, no worries.
Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, I would stick with probably like the archaic period because when Homer was writing it, the Greeks, when they wrote their stories, they're writing it in a context of where they're at in their own setting because they're trying to fit the story with what is contextually going on with their lives. So, for instance, one of the biggest things you'll ever notice if you're ever looking at, sorry, I hit my mic. If you're ever looking at pottery, you'll notice that prior to the Persian Wars, whenever the depictions of Amazons are wearing the exact same armor as the Greeks. I mean, like the Corinthian helmet, the bell cuirass, everything is the exact same. The only time you can really tell it's a female is if her helmet is off and she's got this long hair with female features, or a lot of times they would paint the Amazons white as opposed to the black. So like the skin of a woman would be white, so that's how you knew that that was a woman. Um, but then if you look at post Persian War era Amazons, they're all wearing Persian garments. And that's because the Amazons are depicted to be a tribe of warrior women to the east. Well, what was to the east of the Greeks? The Persians. So they would do this contemporary negative view of the Amazons because they didn't like the Amazons. They weren't women to look up to, not to the Greeks anyway. The Greeks were very misogynistic. So to them, these women warriors were the um, antithesis of what it meant to be a Greek man. They were a mockery. So they portrayed them in these like Medized clothing garments because they're like, that's what you are. You are less than us. And so from then on, like I said, everything is more of like a Persian setting for the Amazons. So with Homer's idea, writing in the archaic period, I would portray the armor in somewhat of an archaic fashion, which no one it seems that seems to be his inspiration, which is fine. I don't mind that. My biggest issues is this Hollywood necessity to have the helmets so open faced. Now, yes, earlier archaic Corinthian styled helmets were a little bit more open face. Like for instance, your Myros style helmet, there's a lot more open than say the exactly than the Hermione that you and I have, like the later archaic. Um, but at the same time, it's still, it didn't come all the way down to the top of the chest. and it wasn't like sticking out, or you can see the whole face with maybe a little nose piece. It wasn't like that. It was more right out here, or like yours, maybe even a little closer than that. Um, but it's also this drab color. I It
Yes.
frustrates me to no end every time I see anything historical. Basically anything um, from like circa 1600 back. The average everyday person's wearing just boring beige, brown, green clothes. All of his human history, color has been a huge, major thing. I mean, people love to express themselves. I mean, you should be seeing yellows, bright blues, especially like you see Anne Hathaway as Penelope, and I think she's wearing like a dull blue. She's royalty. She's going to be wearing, bright blue, purple, crimson red, like all these beautiful, bright, vibrant colors because she has the money for it too. And she's also making it herself. So why would she not make herself something very pretty? Um, but you should see a lot more color than this just standard, like, oh look, I look like a guy wearing a jumpsuit that's kind of on the chain gang or something like that. I mean, just very boring. Like,
Something else that I noticed, and someone else pointed it out in the last stream I did, is that they're actually wearing like pants in under their armor. So they're wearing like black jumpsuit pants, which is so barbarian of them.
mm,
But no, this I agree with you 100% with this. I honestly feel like the costumes themselves as a blank blueprint, excluding Batamemnon, is okay. It's completely in line with other Hollywood depictions of armor. There's clearly inspiration from bell cuirasses and clearly inspiration. I'd say Odysseus' helmet more resembles some Chalcidian style
mhm,
helmets. But again, it's just this, why is it black and brown? And I've talked about this before, and other people have basically said that no, it's Nolan's masterful filmmaking, that he's doing a look that's meant to represent the treacherous journey of Odysseus. The problem is that the trailer shows that armor doesn't change throughout the whole span of the film. So it's not like it starts out lovely and polished and bright and colorful, and as he goes through this horrific journey, it gets destroyed. It just starts out as black. And I find it ironic how a movie that actually does this better is 300. Leonidas's armor starts out being, it's metal. It looks a bit weird. It's pitted or whatever, but it's a very metallic looking helmet. And as the film progresses, it gets chipped, it gets broken, it gets the scar down the face, and it actually does a really, really good job at sort of showing the hopes of the Greeks getting diminished through that armor. I'm like, I actually think it would have been really cool if Odysseus starts, hopeful they're leaving for home. He's wearing, probably he wouldn't even be wearing armor really on his journey home. But anyways, like let's say that he's wearing, nice armor. It doesn't have to be like mirror polish, but just have some color to it. Make it feel metal. He's maybe wearing reds or something like that. And as he goes through this horrible journey, his clothing gets muddied and it gets all brown and gunky and his armor gets tarnished. And you could have a visual storytelling component to the actual storytelling component. I think that would be really, really cool. They just don't do this. It's just this brown everything. And it looks fake. And that is one of my biggest problems with it, is that it looks like it's plastic and rubber, because it is.
mhm.
And they've done a really poor job, in my opinion, of actually making the costumes fit into the world that they have created and otherwise gone through a lot of effort to film on location. And one of the biggest things that I find really funny is, if Nolan actually did go the historical accuracy route, I almost guarantee that all of the Nolan fans would be saying that this is the coolest thing ever. He's filming it right. Not only is he filming on location, he's filming with accurate armors, but instead, no. And this is one of the biggest things, is people have this idea that historical armor means it looks stupid, it doesn't look cool, and no one would watch it. How would having bright, awesome looking, gleaming bronze armor ever make someone go, I'm not watching that film? It makes no sense to me.
Do you mind if I interject real quick?
Yes, absolutely.
So going off of that thought, one of my favorite things to do is whenever I'm going through my timeline or our group on Facebook, um, is a good buddy of mine. You might know him. His name is Adam Godfrey. He has this picture of him at Days of Nights standing next to a 15th century knight while he's wearing his full archaic Spartan armor, and it looks fantabulous.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, but it does. Like, your armor, it may not be as fully connected together as when I say that, I mean like the articulation and stuff like that as a 15th century man at arms knight, etc. But yours is a fully armored, historically accurate Spartan of the 6th century, the second half of the 6th century BCE. Like I can look at that and I recognize that immediately, and the detail, like your own sewing, like your on your chitin there at the bottom. I mean, it's immaculate. I mean, it's kudos to you, by the way.
Thank you very
But
much. I really appreciate that.
but in your, I'm trying to remember, 1920.
I'm almost 20. Yeah.
Almost 20. So for everybody who's watching, he's a 19-year-old young man, and he has an armor set that is better than Christopher Nolan, who is umpteen trillion years old, who's made umpteen trillion million dollars. And Adam's just like, I'm a YouTuber and check it out. I mean, it's not that, I don't want to say it's not that hard. I know you put time and effort into it. This is like a 5-year project. But for somebody who's doing this on your own and you have that high quality, accurate armor, that goes to show that Nolan, with his near infinite money, could have done, maybe not necessarily had to be as perfect as yours, but he could have done something a little bit better than what he has. He could have reached out to actual archaeologists, gone to the museums, stuff like that. Like, for instance, with Matt Damon. Matt Damon, the movie The Duel. Was that directed by Christopher Nolan?
No, I forget who that was though. But that was the one with the half face visors, wasn't
and
it?
the thing is during the production of that, they kept going on that like, oh, we went to like the Wallace collection, or we went to the Louvre. Like we went to all these places to see all these armors, and they came up with this half helmet.
They could have just done a helmet with a visor. Boom.
Yeah. And if nothing else, like have the helmet get knocked off, which is one of the most common things just do. Like, for instance, one of my favorite examples of a beautiful armor and helmet, it'd be more of like a late 13th going into like early 14th century styled armor. And that was the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. The eldest brother, I forget his name, but there at the end of the battle, he's wearing, an actual closed helmet and stuff like that. And, his armor, he has his beautiful tunic on and everything. And he's got his spalders and stuff like that. It looks, like I said, circa early 14th century-ish. The helmet may be a little bit later, but my point being is during the charge in the battle, he puts the closed helmet on, and he's charging into battle and everything. And it does eventually get knocked off because you want to see the actor's face. But if they would have done something like that, I would have been a little bit more okay with it. But I want to see a full set of armor that's beautiful. Like one of my favorite movies is also A Knight's Tale. Wildly inaccurate, historically speaking. But Heath Ledger's armor, whenever he gets his new armor and he puts it on, I mean, he looks fantastic. I mean, I love the armors in that movie. Yeah, some are a little fanciful, but overall, like, it looks like what you would expect a 15th century knight to be, even though this movie should have taken place, I think it was in the 14th century again, but I digress. But again, like, unless you actually knew that, you wouldn't know nor care. You would see that, be like, oh, I can recognize that as a relatively accurate to that time period. Same thing with the archaic period armor in this movie with Christopher Nolan's. I think, yeah, it could have been circa 7th, 8th century BC style armor, and that would have been okay. Even if it is a little inaccurate, that's fine. I don't think it has to go full Dendra, because the Dendra armor is circa 1500 BCE, whereas the Trojan War was circa 1150 BCE. So that's like a 400-year difference. Armor could have changed dramatically during that time. And in fact, a lot of frescoes we see, the armor does look a little bit closer to archaic than it does the Dendra. Now, there are still very much aspects of the Dendra and stuff like that. Like, for instance, the boar tusk helmet. And in fact, Homer even mentions it in the Odyssey, or in the Iliad, when what is the name? Menestheus gives Merones. He gives Odysseus his boar tusk helmet, and then like Ajax the Greater has his tower shield. And we see images from frescoes of tower shields and people with boar tusk helmets. So like there are aspects of the Trojan War period that could have been put into the movie. Like, I think if, maybe later in the movie, if they're on Odysseus' ship or something like that, and you're in the captain's quarters, if there is like a boar tusk helmet in the background, I think that would be a perfect little Easter egg, or like a little like, hey, check this out. We do know some things. Obviously, until the movie comes out, we can't tell. But I hope they put something like that into it, just as like we did read the Odyssey at least once.
I think something else that's a bit of a shame is that, like, open-faced Greek helmets actually existed. right? And they would work for that archaic period thing. Give him an Illyrian helmet. It literally is the perfect helmet for keeping someone's face. You have that in the shot. Give him an Illyrian helmet. Or ironically, the Boltusk helmet is an open-faced helmet. One of the biggest things I find funny about this is that Hollywood had an opportunity where they could have added horns on helmets and it not be inaccurate, and they don't, which I think is quite funny. Okay, let's pay a visit to the chat because we've been ignoring these people. I'll go up back to the top. We've got some epic emojis. It's 12 a.m. Why me? Well, I'm glad that you're being a responsible person and watching us instead of going to bed because you do have school the next day. So I'm not saying I'm encouraging it, but also good lad. We've got a Cypranius. Sorry if I say your name wrong. Hello to you. And of course, Paul. Paul, unfortunately, has a family and a wife, and that's why he couldn't join us on this panel today. But
he's also watching the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, like a nerd instead of reacting to Odyssey armor.
Yeah.
Anyways, but he's joined us in the chat, so that's very nice to see. We've got Xander saying good health and good luck to you all. Thank you very much. Likewise. Historically accurate armor looks cool by default. I agree. I actually think that a lot of my favorite armors are historical armors. And a movie series, which you may have heard of, it's called The Lord of the Rings. I really like it. Did a really, really good job at making fantastical armors represent cultures, but feel like they work because they are based on real armors. And there's something that I really, really love about that. Sauron, he looks insane. He has these spikes, he has this stuff like that. And then you realize they actually based lots of the stuff on actual German Gothic armors, or the Nazgul gauntlets are basically just Germanic gauntlets. Gothic gauntlets. And, you got the Easterlings, is that what they're called? They're very sort of Persian-y inspired. Culturally, the Gondorians are, of course, sort of very 15th century Italian inspired with barbutes and stuff like that. The Rohirrim are very Saxon England. You have all of these sort of cool historical armors that are fantasticalified, but still feel real. And that's one of the things that I think real armor does a really good job at, is that they've existed, and there's lots of shapings and styles that feel practical and feel like they would work when you see them on screen because they did. And in a way, it's like, some video game armors. Like, I tried to play Elden Ring once, and I ended up just really not enjoying the game. But anyways, I was laughing at all of the swords that were 4 times the size of a person that you're swinging around. And you're running around like this, I find it really funny. My friend thinks that's really epic. But for me, I find something silly in stuff that's impractical. It would be like someone having a high-speed chase in a movie with roller skates. It's like, hold on a minute, that doesn't work. So when you see like these over-exaggerated things in Hollywood, I think they look a little bit ridiculous. So I 100% agree that historical armor is sort of epic by default. And I think that one of the reasons is just it looks really good, but it's also really practical. And that's something that I wish that we saw more in film.
Real quick with the Lord of the Rings. So for those who don't know, which I'm sure everybody probably does, I am a massive Lord of the Rings fan. In fact, my ex-girlfriend and I, our first date was a extended edition original trilogy movie marathon. That was our first date. It was the longest date I've ever had, but it was also like one of the best I've ever had. It was awesome. It was so great. Because
just say, how long is that? 13-hour date?
And we just sat there on the couch, ate popcorn, vegetated and stuff like that, and just talked about how much, like, oh, did you know this? Well, yeah, did you know that? Stuff like this. So huge nerds, and it was great. Like, best first date ever. If she ever sees this, because she's still a really good friend of mine, she's gonna be like, but
wait, drop her name now so we can all find her.
Oh no, she would kill me for that. She's a fan from afar. But I periodically watch like little snippets from documentaries or like behind the scenes things, and there at the end when Aragorn went and in the Three Hunters, they went and spoke with Mouth of Sauron and stuff like that. The final battle. You noticed how Aragorn, he's not wearing a breastplate. He's wearing mail armor with a hauberk over it. Right? It's a beautiful hauberk. The great intricate designs. But I found out that Peter Jackson originally wanted Viggo Mortensen to wear a breastplate, but it was Vigo who's like, no, 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 because he's like, Aragorn is a ranger. He spent his whole life training as an archer and a swordsman from afar, in the woods, guerrilla warfare and stuff like that. He doesn't wear this big, heavy, bulky armor. And when I say that, I mean then just his words, not mine. Armor, yes, it's bigger, it's heavier, but it wouldn't work. Anyway, my point being is that he said that to fit Aragorn's style, it should be more of like the mail and halberd that he had been previously wearing. And it's that attention to detail of the actor himself to realize this is more accurate to this character than if he was wearing all of a sudden like, oh, it's the end game, and now he has his strength and charisma, well, not charisma, his strength and constitution maxed out, and so now he's wearing this big, giant, massive armor set. It's not how that works. Now, granted, whenever I play like Dragon Age Origins, one of my all-time favorite games, that's exactly how I am. I'll wear like medium like weight armor, as it's called, but I just keep building up my strength and constitution. That way, by the end of the game, I'm wearing the biggest and most like badass looking armor, and I'm like, yeah, one swing, cleave a Hurlock's head off. Like, awesome. But and I don't feel any damage. And ha ha ha. But I digress. Your character can laugh in the game. But I forgot what I was going to. Yeah, my point being is that it's even the actors, their own attention to detail that can affect a movie and come out great. I mean, it's just one of those things where it's so minor because he's only wearing that for about a half hour of the movie, but at the same time, it is keeping in character with the character. And I love that style of attention to detail. That's why Lord of the Rings is the greatest trilogy ever. I mean, between the music, the cinematography, the acting, I mean, Peter Jackson could not have picked a better cast of characters for his cast of characters. I mean, I cannot complain about a single person. And the fact that, like, random tangent again, having Sir Christopher Lee, who's like, oh, if you stab someone from their back, they don't make a sound. Well, how do you know that? Guess what he was? And, what was it, World War II? Yeah, he's like, I was a British spy or whatever it was. Like, he did things that he knows firsthand. And Peter's like, oh, yeah, that's right. I should probably listen to him.
Yes. No, I love those films. Those are great. Okay, Penny, we're just going to go back to the chat here.
Yep. Sorry. I run on
tangent. No worries. Hey, Lord of the Rings is great. People love Lord of the Rings. Yeah, the Witch King armor is probably the coolest fantasy armor. It's definitely up there. I really, really like the Witch King's armor. So Minecraft Cubing says that we just need one movie that's historically accurate, even partly that as well, and the others will follow. And some Cypranius has recommended The Northman. Is it The Northman or The Norseman?
It's a Northman. I know what it is. It's that's
what Robert Eggers' film, isn't it? Where What's it's with Hamlet, I think.
Oh, Robert Eggers. Yeah, where he's got like the same 5 actors in every single one of his movies. See, seriously, William Dafoe, one of the Skarsgård brothers, Anna Taylor-Joy, I think it is. The one whose eyes, she's a beautiful woman, but her eyes.
Oh, the blonde girl.
Yeah. I shouldn't say that. She's gonna find me. Be so mad.
I think it would have been interesting actually because I watched. He also did The Witch, didn't he? Or the Witch, the horror film.
Mm-hmm. And that also has her in it too.
Yeah, I was gonna say it does as well. I'm not a massive fan of that film, but I did watch The Northman and I did enjoy The Northman. I wonder what Eggers would have done if he was given the Odyssey. Because he likes to try and do it very period accurate. And I actually think that for a sort of very religiously inbuilt epic poem like the Odyssey, I actually think that Eggers would have been my go-to choice for a film on the Odyssey. I actually think that would have been a really, really interesting director to have do this film. Nolan, like overall, I like Chris Nolan quite a lot. I'm not one of his diehard fans where I love every film that he does, but of course, I like the Dark Knight movie. I like Inception. I like all this other stuff. Oppenheimer, I wasn't a big fan of that one, but like overall solid director. But I think someone like Robert Eggers would have done a really interesting take that I think would have felt a lot more ancient for this film. He likes to get into that sort of ritualistic, cultural, stuff like that. It's a very unique filming style. I think he would have done I'm not going to say a better job, but I think he would have put a more interesting take on the Odyssey than Nolan. But we haven't seen the Odyssey yet.
Well, and Eggers also does a lot of like the minor details. Like in the
Mhm.
Northman, there at the end, you see the main character, he's being carried off by a Valkyrie. And I didn't know this until after the fact, but like the Valkyrie, she has, yeah, the engravings in her teeth. I thought
Yeah.
she was wearing braces at first. I was like, what? And then I started like, having facial hair, guys, your nose itches a lot more, especially in Colorado. The air is so dry, so my nose is always itchy. Um,
That's
so
great
if you
tidbit.
guys see
Thank
me
you for that.
scratching, I'm sorry. I'm not picking a nose. I'm just scratching. But yeah, so like she's got these cut engravings in her teeth, and I come to find out that that's like apparently to the Norse that was a symbol of being a warrior or something like that. I never knew that.
I think we have like one or two skulls that seem to show that on Viking HT. But yeah, that's cool. Also, like the armor, and that's pretty accurate. You see guys with nasal helms and mail shirts. I think he
Mhm.
would have done actually a better job for capturing that feel of the Odyssey more than Nolan did. So he's who I would choose. I have a question here. Adam, have you oiled your hair at an event, and will you grow a beard? I have not oiled my hair at an event, and as much as I would absolutely love to grow a beard, my beard does a lovely migration pattern of starting here and just falling. Boom. I can grow the little stash, but that's about it. So as of now, unfortunately, I have to be clean shaven. Although my girlfriend really doesn't like beard, so I think that she's secretly putting something in the water that stops me from growing facial hair. It's a little scheme, but I'm not sure. We have Matthew Baldock, who is a member of our group. He is now in the chat. Hi, Adam, your friendly neighborhood Hellenistic Spartan / stereotypical Gaul. Now that's a superhero introduction. Long time no see. Saw you live again. Thanks for being here, Matt. Nice to have you here.
Matt's also one of those people who has a beautiful panoply. Matt, I mean, I know you and I haven't directly met face to face, but obviously we're friends and everything. And I've seen your Hellenistic impression. I love it. I love your Thracian helmet. I love your cuirass and everything. I'm also super jealous of the fact that you're like, 300 feet tall and I'm just 5'9". But it looks great.
That is actually something that's really funny in our group. Is that I would say most of the Spartan reenactors, like who actually focus their panoply on Spartans, are over 6 foot. And it's funny because we have that Benny's over here, like we have that burial find with the Spartans where they are at like 6'1", 6 foot, 5'11". That's kind of cool little tidbit. Wannabe Revan has asked, can we talk about the Odyssey? We yeah. We've been doing that for about 20 minutes, but I'm sure we will come back to it in good time. It's so sad that Alexander didn't do well. It was so historically accurate. I loved it. I've watched that movie once, which may be a crime against humanity. But all I remember is that the opening battle scene was really good. I really, really liked that.
The
And
director's
someone,
cut is so
I
good.
think it's Paul. I think it's Paul owns one of the linothorax, like tube and yolks from the set. And honestly, apart from the fact I don't think it's made from like the most accurate linens, but it's like visually, like it works if you want to use it in a
Mhm.
reenactment. Like the armor is pretty solid in that.
Can I,
And then they use Weta Workshop to do the helmets and stuff like
mhm.
that as well. Yeah.
Can I interject real quick on that?
Yes.
So one thing I love the movie Alexander, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, they casted what is his name, Colin, or it's the Irish actor something Farrell, Colin Farrell, yeah, Colin Farrell. So they cast him as Alexander, and then Rosario Dawson as Roxana, which I thought she actually, or Roxanne, whatever you want to call her name. I thought she did great at that. But I actually really enjoyed Colin as Alexander because you see him as a young man, trying to find his place and everything in the, in the eyes of his father. But then you see him as he's growing up and going to, the west and to the Indus and everything. You see his hair getting longer, but you also see him transitioning from a stereotypical Macedonian prince and king to this, as we would call it nowadays, Hellenized, but this, not west. Well, I mean, he went to the west in Dus, but he went eastward. Anyway, my point being to go into the east where he's mixing the Greek culture with like the Persian, the Medes, and the Bactrians and stuff like that, creating this amalgamation. Like you see him wearing traditional Greek clothing, And then by the time they get to like the great marriage of like the 40 generals and everything, he's wearing Persian silk. I mean, I love stuff like that. You know, you mentioned about like the transition and stuff. Yeah, it's not necessarily showing the transition as armor, but it's showing transition into who he is as a person. I love the
Mhm.
movie. I thought it was a great movie. Yeah, it's long, so people think it's boring and dry. And I know there's this myth out there that Ptolemy was Alexander's half brother. He was the illegitimate son of Philip. That's not true. Ptolemy went, that after Alexander's death, Ptolemy did perpetuate this myth because he was trying to earn the right to be the Macedonian king, legitimize himself. Like, well, if I'm part of the Macedonian family through both Philip and Alexander, then I have right to become the next king of, Alexander's empire. No one bought it except for, the Ptolemaic Egypt, because, obviously they're under the control of Ptolemy. But this myth is perpetuated by the movie by Anthony Hopkins. There's his old man form and everything like that. And he's like, oh, I'm Alexander's brother. People don't realize this. And I'm also the one who killed him. Also not true. They were like best friends, thick as thieves. I mean, not as close as Hephaestion, but Ptolemy was a childhood friend of Alexander, and he was one of his bodyguards. Like, Macedonian kings choose their own bodyguards. And so Alexander chose him. And if you get chosen to be a bodyguard, your entire family for like the rest of eternity is essentially nobility. Whether you were nobility to begin with or not, you like that's like one of the highest honors of other than being the Macedonian prince or king, is being a bodyguard, because then it's like, I am one of the most trusted servants of the entire empire, or rather entire kingdom. I digress. I love that movie. It's so good.
Benny's just been wanting an opportunity to word vomit about these things, and now we've given it to him.
Yeah.
So Paul says, "Have you seen The Return?" I did watch The Return. That was with Ralph Fiennes, I believe his name is, Voldemort, and that was basically not the whole Odyssey, but when he comes back and he kills all the suitors and he shoots the arrow through the axes and stuff like that. I actually did really enjoy that film.
I only saw that part. I didn't see the whole film.
Oh, really? I turfed my girlfriend to it in theaters, but she proceeded to fall asleep. I was enjoying it, and that, of course, has the most heartbreaking death in all
Argus.
of media, of the dog dying when he comes home.
Yep.
So sad.
Argus.
Also, how old is that dog? Like, he's
He was
been
over
gone.
20.
Yeah, he was over 20 years old, and I feel like it has to be more than that, because to have that connection, like, he couldn't have just been anyway. So this dog is the oldest dog in the world. So
The best boy.
yeah. Anyways, and he comes home and he's like the only one that knows that this is Odysseus, and he proceeds to die. I quite enjoyed that film, and I actually think that film did a pretty good job at capturing the material culture of ancient Greece. Like, people were wearing reds and blues and stuff like that. The architecture, from memory, it felt like they were in ancient ruins, if you get what I mean. Like, it was just sort of white. But overall, I actually really quite liked that film, and I really liked Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus. I thought that he actually did that really, really well.
Minecraft has a comment.
Let's see. If you catch any comments that you want to respond to as well, feel free. I'm flicking up and back down to see if what we've got.
Unfortunately, Matthew, I will not be at MTA. I'm only going to be at Loudon this year. Potentially Days of Nights, but I'm only going to Loudon for the spring part.
Let's see. Okay. We've got a question here about didn't Lacedaemonians oil their hair? I don't know why I stick to that. I'm a barber by trade, and I've cut hair at Civil War and Indian War events with period tools. We did an event at Fort Loudon once. Oh, that's awesome. Yes, they did famously oil their hair. The issue is that I have very, very curly hair. It's very messy, which is why I'm wearing a hat today. That's my go-to thing now. So I basically never brush my hair because I end up ruining the curls and going really, really frizzy. Whereas like Patrick, one of our other great Spartan reenactors, he has beautiful long hair and a beard, which I also cannot grow. And he will very frequently, add some oil to his comb and comb his hair. For me, I just don't really have to do that. And then I just don't do it because I don't have to do it.
I pamper my hair way too much. I mean, I have all the fancy conditioners and shampoos, and I brush my hair probably 3 different times a day. It's not super great right now just because it's still somewhat drying. I got out of the shower not all that long ago, so my hair is still slightly damp. But yeah, I mean, once it's fully dry, I'll brush it like 2 more times before I go to bed.
He'll do it on the stream if you pay him, you know.
Yeah, and then
Um,
I even have a comb that was given to me by one of our group mates. I can't remember if it was Mari. I think it was Marius. Marius Kempf. It may be somebody else. I can't remember. Somebody I bought their sandals from also gave me this comb for my impression. So whenever we're at Loudon, I can use this comb to brush my hair and everything.
I made a comb actually. It was an Etruscan one that I based it on, and I carved it all out. And I don't know if we have any evidence at all for wood burning. I don't think so. But I ended up, because I didn't want to engrave it all by hand, I got a old wood burner that I had. And I engraved it by burning it. So technically, that's probably not that accurate, but it was a quick way for me to engrave it. Okay, we've got someone else. Greetings. Totally agree with Benny about the Macedonians and the movie. So there we go. We've got the admirer. That's excellent.
That's my new favorite.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit more about the Odyssey. We've sort of talked about the armor. We've already covered that a little bit more in detail before. So something else which is great to have Benny here is to talk about some of the other aspects of the Odyssey and what we hope get presented by this film. He missed the mark with the armor in our opinions, but hopefully he's able to capture and tell the story in a good way. Something that I myself would really like, and I've talked to John about this, another member of our group, that is interesting how in lots of these ancient accounts, the gods are described as having a very physical role in the battle, like physically moving a spear out the way or coming down and fighting over this battlefield. And of course, the Odyssey sees a lot of gods, like quite a few of them. And I'm really interested to see how are they going to go about this representing of these deities in this film. I haven't really looked at the cast of the film, to be quite honest. I know a lot of people are not a fan of the cast. Some people think it's great. I haven't really looked at it. I'm not really sure. But I think Zendaya is supposedly Athena. Which, I don't know. I mean, I feel like she could pass as Athena decently well. But
it depends on her mannerisms, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. But I feel like visually, I think that she's a fine as Athena.
A young woman, a pretty young woman, yeah.
Yeah. But I think the biggest complaint that I've seen about this film is that it feels like a Marvel film as a cast. You got Tom Holland, you got Zendaya, I don't know who else. You got Matt Damon. He's not in Marvel films, but anyways,
he actually is in Marvel. He plays very briefly in Thor. Was it Thor Ragnarok or Thor: The Dark World? Whatever, where Loki is playing as Odin in disguise, and he's watching a play. And in the play, it's Loki and Thor. When Loki sacrifices himself, the guy who plays as Loki is Matt Damon.
Oh, really?
The guy who plays as Thor is the youngest Hemsworth brother.
Oh, that's cool. I never.
Yeah, fun fact.
I liked Thor 1. I actually kind of liked Thor 2. The last Thor movie, I did not like at all.
Sorry for the interjection again.
So anyways, that's something that I'm interested to see, is how are they going to play with this very physical role that the gods have. I think that could be really cool.
So one thing that I kind of hope they do, they're probably not going to, especially from the shots that we have seen. But if you've ever read any of the Homeric hymns, especially the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, it's probably one of my favorite hymns to a god or goddess, because the gods, the Greeks, the gods, the forms that we see them, that's not their true form, obviously, right? They can make themselves look however they pretty much want. But one thing the gods do is that, especially if you read anything with a god speaking, both the way they speak and also the way they appear, it's more than just human. So, for instance, Aphrodite, when she visits Anchises in the Homeric hymn of Aphrodite, she's like a foot taller than him. Like just a straight up head, like her head bumps into the ceiling of Anchises' house. And he keeps saying, he's like, "Oh, goddess, what can I do for you? Welcome to my home. I can get you this, that." She's like, no, I'm not a goddess. I'm just a girl. And it's like, no, we know you're a goddess because A, your hair is literally glowing. B, you're a foot taller than a really tall, noble man. And then C, even the way you speak. So the gods, people don't, you may not realize this in ancient Greece, the language that the Greeks spoke is not the language that the gods spoke amongst themselves. The gods obviously spoke Greek, or at least what we know of Greek, but the gods had their own individual immortal language. So whenever they would actually come down and speak with the humans or the mortals, their way they would speak, it sounded disjointed. Like it was still proper Greek, but it sounded a little off, like whether it's their pitch or what. And so sometimes the humans are like, "You're speaking Greek. I know you are, but there's something about you that's just not quite right." Also, just like every other time a humans interact with a god in their mortal form, you're a foot taller than I am. So I know you at least have some sort of divinity or you are a divine yourself.
She's a skinwalker, actually.
Yeah. So, and then also with, Zendaya as an actress, because Zendaya, she's a mixed actress. She's, I don't know if she like half African American or if she's like half
I have no idea, but she has sort of olive skin tone.
yes. So which I think is actually kind of great because the Greeks themselves have olive skin tone. But additionally, have you ever heard of the myth of Black Athena?
I have heard this before, but again, it's just the type of thing that I've just sort of looked at and then scrolled on past. Yeah.
In Ethiopia, even in the ancient Greek, Ethiopia, Athena visits them, and she's dark complected. She's depicted as a black goddess, and so having an actress who is of mixed descent as someone who's like half white, half blackish. Again, Zendaya, I'm sure you're never going to watch this, but if you are, I apologize for not knowing your actual.
She's actually a massive fan of the channel.
Yeah, I know. She's going to like send me a strongly worded letter like, "How dare you?" And then we'll be best friends afterwards when I apologize. Anyway, I digress. So having her as Athena, I think is actually kind of a neat little touch because if you do know about the story of Black Athena, you'd be like, hey, that's kind of a neat representation. I don't necessarily think that's what they were going for. I think it's more of like, okay, we have Tom Holland. Let's bring her into. Let's make her Athena. Why not?
So touching on that, because I've never heard that Ethiopian story before. So what is the context of that? Like, what leads up to that depiction, or is it kind of like how like Jesus often gets depicted as being whatever ethnicity that Christianity is getting preached in? Is it sort of at that situation where the gods often mimic the people that they are talking to? Is that basically what it is?
Yep. So for instance, in the Iliad, the king of Ethiopia is Memnon. Well, Memnon is basically Memnon the Black because he is black. And so unfortunately, there is this mischaracterization. So a lot of people think that, oh, Ethiopia, and we know there's a modern day country in Africa called Ethiopia. We know that the Greeks traveled all around, Mediterranean, and they did go into Africa. So there's this false equation of modern day Ethiopia being the ancient Ethiopia that's being represented in the Iliad. That Ethiopia is actually more like modern day India.
Interesting.
So the Ethiopia that they refer to is actually further east than Troy and Ilium. It's so far east that it goes almost to like Bactria and stuff like that. I mean, you're looking into the heart of the Persian Empire at this point in time. So it's not south, but it's east. Nevertheless, though, as history goes on, this equation becomes synonymous with modern day Ethiopia. And so everybody thinks that, okay, well, Memnon of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian people nowadays are, dark complected, very dark complected. So therefore, Memnon had to have been from this Ethiopia. And whenever he speaks or, has anything with Athena or, there's any time we hear of Athena in Ethiopia, she has to be black. It's the point I'm trying to get to is that the gods do make themselves appear closer to whomever they are speaking with.
Interesting. Okay, that's cool.
I keep hitting my mic.
Stop abusing it. Let's see. Do we have any comments to address? We've got a cameo from Sid herself saying that I have a very nice backwards hat. Well, thank you very much. They need to hire more Greek actors, and that's something that I often see. I think it would have been cool if they got more Greek actors, but also I know that Christopher Nolan works with his sort of band of merry men and women that he likes to film with, and I know a lot of the extras are Greek, so that's something that's good. There are quite a lot of Greek people involved in the filming. I know some people are very upset that they didn't sort of get an actual Greek actor as the main star. Again, directors have who they want to work with, so I won't necessarily fault him on that per se, but I can see why some people would like more Greek people being represented in this.
Ethiopia means the land of the burn-faced people. So thank you for that. Yeah, so like that's perfect. Joe K600. I don't know who that is.
Joe K600.
Oh, well, okay. My
Yeah.
apologies. Yeah. Okay, also real quick with the whole idea of the Greek actors and everything, something that we have touched upon before in one of our like Sparta Re-Examined things is that when we think of Greek people, obviously we think of modern Greeks, right? Olive skinned, usually darker hair. Something that I mentioned in one of my YouTube shorts on Historia Hellenike is that, let's see. For instance, Pyrrhus, the son of Achilles, right? He's the firehead kid. He's a firehead kid. He has red hair. Achilles is said to have been bright, beautiful blonde. Yes, there are modern Greeks that do have, reddish hair. There might be a couple with blonde. I personally have not met anybody with blonde hair that was male in Greece. Every male in Greece that I've ever met during my entire year and some change living there was very dark haired. But we also know through the stories and everything that there were a lot of blondes. There were people with blue eyes. A lot of these, what you would consider Northern European traits, I would just say Western European traits. Not necessarily Northern because, there could be people up north that actually by a gene or whatever are dark complected just naturally. Not necessarily, that's more like the exception to the rule than the rule itself. But this idea that like, oh, it's in Greece, it has to be a Greek actor. I understand your point and it is valid. But at the same time, you have to look at the context of some of these characters. Some of the characters are known to have had, long blonde hair with blue eyes. I think I would rather cast somebody who has long blonde hair with blue eyes as opposed to somebody who's, a modern Greek with black hair, olive skin, and brown eyes. That's just me. Now, they could be a phenomenal actor or actress, and then if that's the case, okay, go for it. But if I'm just looking purely at aesthetics, I would cast somebody who fits that mold of what that person's description is. Like Achilles, the TV show Fall of Troy, having a African-American gentleman play as Achilles and bald at that, when we know that Achilles has long, blonde, beautiful hair and is very fair complected. I didn't even think he was that great of an actor. I'm sorry, whatever your name is. I just didn't think you were right.
He's also a fan of the channel, Benny. You're offending all of these.
Because he was also very stoic and angry and brooding the entire time. And it's like, okay, yes, you got the brooding part down, but Achilles he flew by his emotions. He flew by the seat of his will. Like he let you know if he was upset. Whereas this Achilles just says, no. Achilles is like, I don't like you. That's his style.
I think one of my biggest things as well is that Brad Pitt genuinely does such a good job at being Achilles in Troy. Like, I don't think he could have cast a better actor who plays the role, but also he looks the part as well. Like, he looks like almost perfect casting, like in that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And part of me sort of wishes that for the Odyssey film, they have some cameos from the people that were in Troy. Like for me, like I even look at, I think Paul mentioned earlier, I saw in the chat, is that Agamemnon doesn't have a beard. And this is sort of really interesting. Especially as Agamemnon's armor, we actually have a description of by Homer that it's meant to be emblazoned with golds and silvers and stuff like that. And of course, in this, he's just Black Batman. But that's another thing, is that I forget the actor's name who plays Agamemnon in the Troy movie. He's also a Stryker in X-Men. I can see his face. I cannot think of his name.
Irish gentleman. He does the
is that what?
Yeah, that's him. That's him.
No way.
Yeah, the guy from the McDonald's. Like, I think that's the McDonald's him too, right?
Yeah. Of course, the American was. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But anyway, so he for me does such a good job at portraying Agamemnon. Like he's sort of arrogant, cocky, but he also he does that so well. And and his armor and stuff like that in the film is a little weird, but it still feels almost like how it's described. It's a really shiny, has jewels built into it, silver and gold. I'm pretty sure. Like he just feels way more like Agamemnon than the guy who feels like he came out of, Ares from Wonder Woman. Like that's sort of one of my biggest things. And people sort of talk about it like the Odyssey is a superhero work. And I'm like, but maybe you can make that argument, but my problem is that you're conflating 21st century superhero models with the ancient stuff. And I'm like, honestly, if Nolan wanted to do a modern thing, it would have been really weird. But I feel like he could have pulled off an Odyssey set in the modern day or something, as opposed to the ancient one, because his feels like a story that's set in an ancient world but with really modern visuals. And for me, it just sort of conflates. It just sort of feels weird to see.
They've done that, though, in a way of having a modern setting with the Odyssey called "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
I've never watched it.
I don't know if we can be friends anymore. I just final straw.
Oh, wow.
Bye, everybody.
Now he's gone. We can finally get down to some productive talk.
No random tangents.
Okay, so let's see.
Brian
So
Cox,
yes,
that's his name.
Ralph here. What's his name? Sorry,
Brian Cox, the guy who played as Agamemnon.
That's his name. I think he does such a good job with that.
Yeah, Scottish gentleman. There's something about people with a Scottish accent; they just do great in any sort of.
Is he Scottish or Irish?
I think he's Scottish.
I'm just going to Google it right now.
Yeah, because
what's his name? Brian Cox.
Brian Cox, and then the guy who plays Agamemnon, Brendan Gleeson, is also Scottish. Brendan Gleeson, for anybody who doesn't know, is the father of the guy who plays as Bill Weasley in the Harry Potter series.
Oh, he is. Yeah. So Brian Dennis Cox. That's such a Scottish name. Is a Scottish actor. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So he's in Troy. Oh, he's in Braveheart as well. He's in a lot of stuff. I thought he did a really, really good job as Agamemnon in Troy. So let's talk a little bit. I have someone here. Ralph says that Danger Panoply was a prototype. Let's maybe talk a little bit about the Danger Panoply, because this is something that we have obviously seen a lot. A lot of people really wanting to talk about Danger Panoplies. They should be in Danger Panoplies. Here's the trailer redubbed, whether in Danger Panoplies. But as we said earlier, the Danger Panoply that most people model the armor from is actually a couple hundred years before the rough 1200 BC date of Troy. And I believe Homer explicitly mentions that the Bortos helmet given to Odysseus is a family heirloom. So, and of course, Homer is interesting. He's writing in the 700 BCs? Is that roughly when, or the 800 BCs? It's roughly when Homer,
8th century, so 700s. Yeah.
Okay, that's roughly when he's writing. So he's writing a couple hundred years after lots of oral tradition has sort of created these stories. So his world that he sort of describes to us is a bit of a mixture between the contemporary world of his and the actual, Bronze Age Trojan War. So with the Danger Panoply, it is technically a little bit earlier. Do we have any other styles of armor that would basically bang on the nail on the head, fit the 1,200 mark?
Well, there is one armor. I can't remember the technical name of it, but the helmet is called the Kegel helm. Yeah, it looks like because it looks like a mix between the Dendra armor and the archaic armor, and the helmet is like an Illyrian with a J crest on it.
It's basically a proto-Illyrian helmet.
Exactly. But what's funny is that the Illyrian, believe it or not, was actually modeled after the Corinthian, just without the nasal piece. And then it just becomes more open face. Because the Illyrian helmet, it becomes, initially it is two pieces of armor or metal that are riveted together, usually around the crown where the crest would go. Just like this Kegel helm, but it becomes modeled after the Corinthian once it becomes a single piece, because they basically do the same initial hammering of the shape and stretching of the metal like the Corinthian, but instead of closing it further, they just leave it a little bit more like a triangular, or I guess even say like a trapezoidal opening right here.
So I'm just looking to share my screen. This is the helmet, that you're talking about?
I think if they did something like that, I would have loved to see that, because you don't really see this helmet very often. I mean, that's the only one of its kind that I know, but that's an early Iron Age helmet. That's a a 9th or like a early 8th to late 9th century BC style of helmet. And that right there, I think it's made of, I want to say it's 4 or 5 different pieces of metal that have been riveted together.
Right. Yeah, we often see the like Greek helmets are typically famous for being one-piece constructions, but this is basically, I would say, this is sort of the stereotypical geometric period helmet. Um,
Geometric is a pottery term. Sorry.
or is it specifically only pottery?
Yeah, so geometric because it occurs during what we call the Greek Dark Ages, but the actual technical term is the early Iron Age. So it goes from so circa 1000 BC up to circa 800 ish BC is the that's the early Iron Age because they're starting to use iron for their weapons and armor, or not necessarily their armor, but for their weapons. And then the Archaic period, still use bronze for their armor, but they're using iron weapons. And that becomes the technical Iron Age. But the Dark Age is a literary thing. So whenever you hear somebody talk about the Dark Age, that's a literary point in time where they're not writing hardly anything down. Language changes. It basically just drops out. The written language drops out. Geometric is referenced in pottery. It's a style of pottery. So a lot of people also typically confuse or conflate that they're like, oh, the geometric period. Well, no, because that's only for pottery. Because the geometric period coincides with the Iron Age when it comes to weaponry. Typically, when we think of something of a period, we're actually looking at the weapons and armor. So the Archaic period, it technically means like the early or beginning stage of Greek warfare, I guess, if you want to equate it that way. And then you get to the classical, and that's more like the monetary, and you get your stereotypical, the classical high age type of Greece, Hellenistic for obviously Hellenism and stuff like that. But the early Iron Age was from roughly 1000 BCE to about 800 BCE, and that's specifically for weaponry.
Interesting. I thought that you could use geometric to describe both.
The geometric actually goes from the early Iron Age into about halfway to the Archaic period. That's why it's like
there
you can't. Yeah, I'm sorry. Now I sound like a pompous scholar, and I do apologize for that, Adam. I probably shouldn't have called you out during the live stream. That's my mea culpa, Latin for my bad.
Called me out. My credibility is destroyed. I mislabeled a period that I don't really look at. Paul actually raised a good point here. Talk about the recent study that showed that you can actually fight in the Dendra panoply. So this is interesting. Of course, lots of archaeologists and historians have absolutely no idea how armor works. And they like to triple the weight of armor and say, this is only for this is only ceremonial, blah, yeah, da, da, da. So, of course, for the longest time, the Dendra panoply was always said to have been a charioteer's armor, an armor that wasn't designed to be fought and he stood in the chariot and rode around with. But of course, this probably isn't the case, because though the armor looks a little bit bulky and a little bit silly, it's highly articulated, and it's I often described it as a crude but very technologically advanced armor for its period. Like, it is a really interesting style of armor. And of course, they have done a study with it. I believe the Greek military actually did it.
It was the Greek Marines, yep.
Greek Marines. And they recreated it, I believe, with Hellenic armors, who we'll also talk about a little bit. Interesting fellow. And they basically showed that, a footman, an infantryman, a fighter can do basically everything that he needs to do with that armor. So this whole idea of the Dendra panoply solely being an immobile charioteer's armor, not really correct. You could very much use this as an infantry armor. But, of course, most people in this period would not be equipped with Dendra panoply. This would be a very aristocratic, very expensive, basically the equivalent of a knight, right, in sort of Bronze Age terms. Like, most footmen on the battlefield at that time would not be equipped in the full Dendra panoply.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was reading Matthew Bolduc's or Hellenic Armor's question. Most the Dendra armor we have is what we assume, especially because of the rarity of it, we assume is for the higher status people and individuals. And typically when we think of like Greek warfare during the Mycenaean period, we do think of charioteers and stuff like that. In fact, Dr. Hans von Veus, he actually has a study, an article about how the Trojan War was probably fought. And it's a great article. It's like 40 pages long. I absolutely loved it. He basically convinced me, but it's basically his theory of how the warfare was fought. And so, the Dendra panoply, if it was worn by somebody on a charioteer, the chariots could ride up through the different ranks and everything and then dismount. Like you would, because they're the leaders of the men, they're the platoon leaders. They're trying to stand out. So they have this most highly adorned armor and everything. And I will give Hellenic armors, Demetrius, this. His representation of the Dendra armor, I think it looks great. I think it
Yeah.
looks beautiful. That being said, I'm not really the biggest scholar when it comes to Mycenaean period armor, so I would have to speak with somebody who is an expert in that regard to really know how accurate it is or not. But when it comes to his like archaic and especially classical, all right, I'm going to get canceled for this. I don't think he's good. I don't like his armor. It is inaccurate as can be. And a lot of people are like, oh, he's the greatest Greek blacksmith. Yeah, Greek as in he himself is Greek. Sure, I'll give him that credibility. But if you're trying to say a Greek blacksmith that focuses on archaic and classical and Hellenistic Greek armors, no, he's a hack. I'm sorry. You're not going to wear 3 inches of fur underneath your armor because you got to keep in mind, typically in the archaic and classical period, they're fighting in the height of summer. August. That is hot in Greece. You were there actually during the Battle of Plataea reenactment in August, right? I'm sure it was pretty warm, right?
Just a wee bit, yeah.
So do you want to wear 3 inches of fur underneath your armor?
That's the thing. I'll add some context in the words of Matt Easton to this. So Hellenic armors, I think we can very much say that he's a skilled metalsmith, very much so. And again, his Danger stuff I think is really, really good.
Yeah, I give him that credit.
The difference is a lot of his classical archaic armors is interesting because he prides himself on sort of being the best and using only authentic methods. We know people personally who've tried to work through him. There's people that have actually reached out to me from the channel who's had a lot of problems working with him. So with this whole Christopher Nolan reached out to him about this, and then Christopher Nolan backed away, I think it could be a little bit of a more two-sided incident where Demetrius is maybe a little bit less. He doesn't like to get critiqued. I guess would say he likes to do it his way, which a lot of
very
artists
full of himself.
Yeah, he likes his reputation. We'll say that. And basically, when we look at ancient Greek armors, there is a lot of things that go into accurately recreating it, and one of them is, of course, the style. How is it made? One of the biggest proponents of that is not even being worn, just does it feel ancient Greek? These craftsmen have a very distinctive style, very subtle shapes, things like that. There are a lot of artists that can really accurately recreate this, and Demetrius can do this. There's some of his armors that I've looked at and the originals and go, that's actually really, really good. And then there's others where he changes the style quite a lot, and it just doesn't quite feel ancient Greek. It looks like a good modern version of it, but it doesn't quite feel ancient Greek. Especially, I find his helmets look a little weird compared to ancient ones. But one of the main problems with Demetrius' stuff is his fit. Ancient Greek armors are supposed to be very, very close fitting. We can see this through archaeological finds, through accurately recreating these things. They are very, very close fitting. They hug to the natural waist and basically sit on the tops of the hips. And there should be no padding in these things. Very, very, maybe lined with leather, but otherwise there should be no significant padding. And I feel so sad for the guy who reached out to me about this. And he was basically, his cuirass was almost finished. And it had huge gaps in parts of it, and it just wasn't fitted properly at all. And then Demetrius lined it with fur. So this guy has, this much padding of fur in his cuirasses. It isn't quite right. So Demetrius is, again, I'd say his Bronze Age stuff is really, really good. I haven't seen anyone else do a better Bronze Age stuff like that. I would say he's definitely the king of that realm. But the idea that he is the, modern Hephaestus, as people often call him, that he makes like museum quality replica, everything's of ancient Greek armor. Some of his stuff is really good. Through my experience, or my second-hand experience through him, I can't necessarily confirm that. In fact, I'd say it's probably not quite right. He doesn't get the fit right. Lots of the style isn't quite right. Might upset some people. I'm just being really, really honest as someone who has also worked a really long time with lots of different armorers in recreating this type of stuff, is you get an eye for it once you've been studying, real armors up close for hours, like studying all the intricate details. And unfortunately, his metalsmithing skill is there. He can raise helmets from one piece with varying thickness. That's really amazing. But he's sort of an artist who has his method. He doesn't necessarily have an eye for all of the ancient details. That's sort of how I describe him.
I'll give him this. Demetrius, if you happen to be seeing this, apparently everybody's watching the show, and everybody's going to hate me, and that's fine. I'll take the hate. So be it. I'll be the rage baiter. I'll give him this. he's a self-made man. He's taught himself how to do it. And he, because I read his introduction on his website, talking about like at the time, no Greek has really been trying to tap into their history in that regard. I think that's great. I appreciate what he's done. I've even been to the Hellenic Armors Museum, and it 6 feet away, it looks beautiful. It looks great. And I, especially like you said, the Bronze Age stuff, because I don't necessarily know better. I mean, it could absolutely be perfect. I don't know. But when I got to like the archaic and classical and Hellenistic, I'm like, this doesn't quite look right. And every time there's this image that he has on his website where he's like touching the torso and the back, like shoulders of one of his cuirasses. And it's got a bunch of fur on the inside. I'm like, whoever's going to wear that is going to have a heat stroke. They're going to the hospital because they're going to burn up wearing all that. That's it. Sure. Visually, it looks kind of cool. I'll give it that, but it's not practical and the dimensions are all wrong.
That's my biggest thing for me is the fit. It's really, really important. For those that don't know, I've talked about this a couple times, but the idea that bronze armor gets really, really hot isn't really correct. So whereas you look at later medieval armors where have quite a reputation of getting quite hot, and that is true, you have more garments underneath that armor. So you have an arming doublet, you have a shirt of mail, you then have a breastplate. It creates layers, and of course layers trap heat. This is a problem. Why is it when you dress up in the winter you wear a t-shirt, a sweater, and a coat? Is because it traps layers. So armor does the same when it's layered. A bronze cuirass in a Greek context is you have a chiton separating it from you, and that's basically it. So your body and the metal basically creates a heat sink, which means that it basically sort of sucks the heat out from you and dissipates it back into the air. Wind will help take sort of heat away from the armor. So you can get warm in the armor, but it doesn't like burn you. Areas like the tops of the shoulders that are actually slightly elevated, those will get very hot because there is no heat sink being created. But actual bronze armor that's fitted correctly remains decently cool. You will sweat under it because of moisture buildup and everything like that, but it's not like that you get super, super hot. In fact, linothorax, tube and yoke style armors, organic style armors, have a tendency of making you hotter because they are layers of organic material, which means that you don't breathe through them. They, if you have a 16 layered linen tube and yoke, that's essentially like wearing 16 linen shirts, if you really want to think of it that way. So that's a little bit of just background information there. So yeah, when he unfortunately makes these cuirasses that are really, really big, as Joe K600, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, he said that I'm Greek. I agree with Benny about Demetrius' stuff is too bulky. That is one of the biggest problems. It is just too big. Or even like some of his cuirasses are cut so like you can't even move your arms practically. And it's a real shame. I won't really dispel much more about the guy who contacted me because I haven't got his permission to share it with anyone. But yeah, like lots of stuff, it was just like the fit is just, it just won't work practically for him, which is awful because Demetrius is charging very much top dollar for these things. And there are armorers that are, Daniel, who made my cuirass over here, one of the most skilled metalsmiths I know who does ancient Greek stuff. Phenomenal artist. Yeah, Daniel Strando. Yep. Yeah. Amazing. Really nice guy as well. Really nice guy, but such a keen eye for detail. And before he made this cuirass for me, like that was a 2 or 3 year project in total of us discussing it, blah, 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 getting it cast and making it. Like that took a long time. And he ended up he wrote like this whole like document with sources and his decisions, blah, 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 with why he did certain creative decisions. He studied art, he studied armor, he cross-referenced, he did so much research to try and make something that felt like it was ancient Greek. Because of course, when we're recreating that transitional cuirass, very early transitional cuirass, there are no surviving ones. So we're purely going off predominantly a bronze figure, but then we're cross-referencing that with other bronze figures. We're cross-referencing that with contemporary armors to try and get details that these figures don't show. And he charged half the price that Demetrius has charged this other fellow who got in contact with me. And that's just insane to me, but anyways. So.
Well, and that's another thing is to go show is that like, again, Demetrius as a metalsmith or even just as a Greek blacksmith, I think for what he is, he's done a good job. He's, like I said, he's worked his way up. He just needs to get better at the finer details and make himself at Daniel's level, he needs to quit self-interpretation and look at the actual facts and stick to the facts. Like, because I know he does look at a lot of like archaeological finds and stuff like that and papers, But he's like, but I'm going to go do it this way. Whereas you mentioned Daniel's like, I want to try and make sure it's accurate as possible. Like you're curious. Much like the PLS helmet, I used to hate the PLS helmet. I used to vehemently hate the Bell Cuirass. I thought it was the ugliest looking thing. And then when I see people who make accurate representations, especially your transitional version, but who was it Andrew? Is it Andrew who has a Bell Cuirass and this muscle cuirass?
Yeah.
Andrew's muscle cuirass, I think, is one of my favorites because I love the shape and how form fitting it is to his body. I mean, it is very much tapered to him, and his Bell cuirass, it's a shorter cuirass and everything like that, but it's so well constructed that as much as I don't like the Bell cuirass, I look at his, I'm like, I like that shape because it's also shaped around him. It's not just this generic off the wall thing, which, hey, there's nothing wrong with generic off the wall. One of my helmets is a generic off the wall helmet. My favorite Corinthian, the one that I'm actually, spoiler, Adam is actually going to be making me a helmet crest for my Corinthian helmet, the one that I'm sending him. That one is form fitted to my head. And Liba Steel Crafts, love you guys. You guys are awesome. And thank you so much for my helmet. Oh wait, was it Liba? Genius Steel Crafts.
You did Genius Steel
Crafts.
Genius
Steel Crafts. Liba did my transverse crest. I digress. I still like Liba, but Genius Steel Craft, I apologize. You guys did a fantastic job. The other helmet was Liba though. Anyway, so it's technically off the shelf, but it's custom to my head dimensions. So I guess that's not really off the shelf, is it?
Yeah, I'd say that's a custom fitted helmet. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was cheap enough. Like it was only 200 euros. So that's for a helmet. That's actually not a bad price. But I know a lot of people will, buy just generic off the wall stuff. And, if you do like enough padding, it'll look fine, just fine. Like for instance, our friend Patrick, his helmet, I think his is a, Danielle steel.
Patrick has a couple helmets. He has his sort of Phrygian style.
His
he has his Corinthian. His
yeah.
Corinthian is a DSC, yeah.
Yeah, so that helmet, it's big, but he's got enough padding in it, and it actually doesn't look bad at all.
Patrick actually has a really big head as well. That's how he stores all of those Lycurgus citations. He keeps Lycurgus said he just keeps in his head. So he actually is lucky enough that the off the shelf helmets, which typically run a bit big, actually fit him really well. I think Paul's sort of like that as well. If Paul's still in the chat, Paul has a big brain and a big head as well. And
Paul rattles off all the things, and I'm like, I can't keep up, and I study this for a living.
Paul's like, I don't know if you can classify him as a historian, bro. Shut up. But for instance, he can't even fit on my Myros style. It just won't fit on his head. Now, I learned that I have a very sort of circular but not massive head. Like my dad has a head that's longer but thinner. He can't even put that on. And that is the best fitted helmet I've ever worn. Like that thing's crazy. And that is something that I guess we can talk about as well. That's sort of talking about armor in general, which is great to talk about. That's one of the most valuable things that experimental archaeology and living history and reenactment can sort of give you is what is it like to wear, function. It's what I'm literally writing my piece for Hellenike, for Ancient Warfare magazine on is how does archaic armor work? But you can only derive that if you have good quality armor. So when someone, puts on a helmet that is, one of those DP Corinthians and then starts saying you have tunnel vision in these helmets and you have all of this stuff, you can't really extrapolate that information because you're not using an accurate reproduction. And that's an accurate reproduction in the sense of its shapes, its eye sizes, its stuff like that. I just saw Paul's comment.
Oh, yeah, that's why I'm smiling.
Of course, that's what Paul looks at when he's looking at these curates.
It even looks like a pair of headlights coming right at you. Just
God,
probably
out of my flow.
On it, you go blind.
What was I saying? Oh yeah. Anyway, so then if you're trying to extrapolate, all of these details from a poorly fitted helmet as well, it can create some more misconceptions. But as you said, you can definitely get away with these off-the-shelf helmets. And hey, and this is something that's we always strive for authenticity, but I'm a big firm believer in authenticity to what your own budget can afford. We'd much rather have people come out to these events who have perfectly fine kit, but the off-the-shelf helmets and stuff like that, but they're out there, as opposed to, there's sort of a tendency, I think, where some reenactors have this sort of gatekeepy attitude of, well, we want only for the best. Well, realistically, not everyone can do that, so and that's minimalist kits are always great. Pilos helmets are freaking great, those things are awesome. But yeah, anyways, just going to Paul's comment here. Are we not going to address the length of the nipples on that thorax under the fur beneath?
They were so wide too. Like
they are. They must have seen Paul and they just got like boom. Yeah. They are. That's an interesting choice. Some cuirasses do have quite long nips, but about half the length of the Hellenic armored ones.
Yeah, I mean, imagine turning real quick and you just cut somebody's head off. Oh, sorry.
The paper cut, but it's a nip
cold
cut.
Outside. I'm laughing at my own jokes, guys. I'm sorry. I'm a dork.
For not being a dad, you are such a dad. So we have Dimitrios is a skilled metal worker, but he has room for improvement. I believe some constructive criticism in good faith can always help. I believe we'd appreciate it. I agree. Like, he has a lot of metalworking skills. The only thing is, as well, is just through, like, I think 3 or 4 people that I've worked with Dimitrios, is he isn't open to any criticism or corrections or sort of, type things. Which is a bit of a problem. Like, I worked with Ferran Garetta to make my Myros helmet. 2 weeks from start to finish to produce that for me, which was insane. But they sent me pictures and I tweaked it tiny bits, blah 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 blah. They made loads of different mock-ups for the motif until I was one that I was happy with. Like, they took all of my most nitpicky details possible and they've now created a really, really good helmet. Like, really, really happy with that. And that's the thing, is like, you can have really skilled metal workers, which Demetrius definitely is, but then there is that taking, what does the customer want? What does the historical sources say? I think that's where he's lacking. And I'd love to actually talk to him about it. The issue is, I don't think he would take what I say seriously. I think he sort of has his modern Hephaestus mindset. Anyways, he's being successful for him. But yeah, I would personally not recommend anyone to get armor made through him for practical use.
Real quick, because I know we're also almost out of time. I do want to get to this, the mischief guy. I can't say that word. The guide, the recycling bit. So that is to me, like, okay, so how often were armors recycled or refitted? Does a bell cuirass fit so well that it may as well be buried with you rather than rework it? That's a good question. So bronze is very malleable. And when I say that, I mean, it's more malleable than steel. It doesn't mean it can't be cold hardened or work hardened. It can be very strong and, where like you really have to crank it to make a move. But overall, when it comes to like steel or especially tungsten, titanium, yeah, it's not as strong. It's not going to hold up as well. But so it could be reworked. In fact, we don't really have a whole awful lot of any cuirasses of any kind, whether it's a like we said, there's no transitional, there's no there's very, very few muscle, and there are hardly any bell cuirasses. They are there,
especially back plates. They're just all gone.
Yeah, but the thing that we also need to keep in mind, so especially during the Archaic period, tropaions, like, at the end of the battle, the victors are going to loot armor and stuff like that from their fallen adversaries, and they're going to sell it. They're going to either use it for themselves or they're going to melt it down and sell it, because bronze is incredibly valuable. I mean, the amount of money that was spent to get a copper, because Greece has tin. Greece has a lot of tin. It's the copper that they have to import, whether it's from Cyprus. In fact, that's where Cyprus gets its name from, Kuparos, which is ancient Greek for copper. Cyprus is the island of copper. So they either get it from there or further east and stuff like that. I mean, in fact, like the actual trade in Greece, it can reach as far as China. People don't realize this, but in like the Bronze Age, they were trading as far east as China. I want to say it was like, constantly or all the time or a bunch, but they do have trade routes that extend that distance. I digress. My point being is that it's extremely valuable. Bronze is highly valuable. So you're going to take it from somebody, and if you can melt it down, rework it for other stuff, go for it. You're going to. That person's deceased. They're not using it anymore. Now, granted, once you get to the classical period, this idea of like, oh, I mean, let's just not take from the dead. That's kind of bad juju. That starts coming about a little bit more. But you also notice that during that time, they're not using as much metal for their actual cuirasses. They're switching over more to the linothorax and stuff, the composite materials. Not to say that there aren't any, but it's not as frequent or as common. So the recycling, yeah, it could be done, especially if it's someone taking armor from their fallen adversary and now they're wearing it for themselves. Sure, especially if they have body type. But if you're wealthy enough to actually have your own custom made bronze armor, chances are your family is pretty well off and they could probably make their own. Your children could probably have their own made. Especially if a father and son are going to battle, he's not going to be wearing his dad's stuff. He's going to be wearing his own because dad's right there with him. So dad's wearing dad's stuff. He needs his own stuff made.
I think something that's interesting to note as well is that we do actually have a few surviving cuirasses, or at least one that I know of, that has these quite crudely sort of riveted in extension plates on the side, which maybe the person put on a little weight over Christmas holidays, or it was passed down to someone else. But otherwise, and I think something else that's interesting to mention is that a lot of the armor remains that we have surviving are temple dedications. A lot of them are found in religious sites. And we have a lot of helmets in relation to other forms of armor. And I believe helmets are one of the most commonly dedicated religious sort of sacrificial elements of armor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something to seriously consider, is that we might have a lot of helmets compared to other pieces of armor because they are the most likely to have been dedicated in a religious site and then found today. So a lot of these armors, bell cuirasses, transitional cuirasses, muscle cuirasses, may well have just been used until failure. And as Benny said, they could potentially be recycled or, something broken, discarded completely. We don't really know. But yeah, most of the time when we're looking at least someone who's equipping themselves in full bronze, we are talking about someone who is incredibly wealthy.
Wealthy of the wealthy.
Yeah, like the hoplite class for, there's a bit of a blurry transition when we get into that Peloponnesian War period and more people, helots are even sometimes fighting as hoplites in certain cases. But most of the time, these guys are decently aristocratic to very aristocratic. So lots of these guys will have enough money to fully commission their own. But again, I'm sure Peloponnesian War, or even if you're sort of some isolated polis that isn't really having any military excursions, and then suddenly you're at war, it might be you grab granddad's stuff that's left in the living room type thing. But a lot of these guys would probably be commissioning it from scratch, I would assume.
And on top of which, I know we're basically over time now, but you also got to keep in mind that there's basically three main things that qualify you to be able to fight in the phalanx, at least during the archaic period. A helmet. So that's why we're going to see a lot more of those. A shield, which is typically made of wood, birch, beech, or something like that. And a spear, which for the most part is wood. And then you have an iron tip and a bronze sauertor. So if you have those three things, you're basically already pretty wealthy. In fact, the hoplite class was usually about 30% of the population. And then within that hoplite class, the ones that actually have armor, like metal armor, you're looking at max 10% ish. I mean, it's
just as a question here, because you are, I mean, one of the things in your thesis was economy, right? When it comes to armors and stuff like that. So someone of my panoply who has helmet, cuirass, upper lower arm armor, thigh armor, greaves, what percentage of that population would you put me? Like how much have I upgraded my social status in my historical impression?
If I was to go back at ancient Sparta in circa 525, 550 BC, and I saw you walk around with all that, I'm thinking you are an offshoot of the royal family, most likely.
So I'm pretty cool, basically.
You are wealthy of the wealthy. I mean, I probably want to be I'm 30 years old. I'm almost 31 years old. You're 19, right? If I'm wearing my panoply, which is basically just a helmet, and my chiton and sandals, and I have my shield and spear, I'm probably not even looking at you in the eye. If anything, I'm probably walking away around from you because I'm like, this guy is way out of my league. He could probably kill me he could probably unalive me if he wants and get away with it. I'm not saying that's probably what's going to happen, but my point being is that you are way out of my league.
Damn, that's pretty cool. That's one positive of reenacting someone who's way higher status than myself in real life. um, okay, let me quickly run through the chat. As again, I said roughly an hour and a half, but hey, we can keep chatting for a little bit more.
I can talk all day. I don't care.
Let's see.
Sure
What
Sydney
were we
probably
talking
wants to have
about?
time with
I
you.
think Matthew Baldock had a question about mitras or mitras, the little lower abdominal flaps. Those are really, really interesting. So I was actually recently talking to Robin about this. Robin is one of our friends from the Netherlands who has a phenomenal group over there.
And Yalios, I think it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I've just never tried.
It basically means like war and hatred.
Something like that. And he has a really awesome panoply that's really focused on recreating a Cretan impression. Now, for those of you that don't know, we won't go super in depth, but Crete has a really interesting style of armor that's pretty unique when compared to all of the other mainland Hellenic styles. And these mitras or mitras, how do you pronounce it?
Mitra.
Mitra? Oh, I was right the first time. Look at that. Which are, for those of you that don't know, essentially on some bronze cuirasses, typically bell cuirasses, we sometimes see what seems to be a lower belly sort of plate, this little bronze semicircle that's basically attached. What makes this really interesting is almost all of the archaeological finds originate from Crete. And I believe the only artistic depiction that actually shows them is a Cretan figure. So this seems to have been almost like certainly way more popular in Crete than it is in the mainland, but possibly not even really used in the mainland. So it's a really interesting piece of armor that very, very few depictions of, sculptural or vase depictions of, and pretty much all. I think there's 11 in the Olympia archives, and I think they all can be traced back to Crete. So interesting there. I don't know why that would be a seemingly Cretan thing. Well, maybe Benny has something there.
Yeah, so the Heraclean Museum in Heraclio, there in Crete. It's a beautiful museum. It's actually one of my favorite museums. In fact, that's where you'll find like the Festos disc and everything like that, which is like has linear A on it, and or actually not even linear A. It's completely its own separate. I digress. That's where you'll find like a lot of Minoan artifacts and everything. But there is a part of their display which is archaic and classical and Hellenistic. And when I was going through, I immediately zoomed in on the mitras there. I mean, there was a bunch of them. I think there's like 6 or 7. Don't say it. Do not say it. I hate it.
I'm ready for the chat to be spammed. I'm ready for the chat to be spammed. Yeah, this is how we see how mature our audience is.
I will put I may not be a dad, but I will put all you children in the corner and make you think about what you did.
You have to start saying it 7 or 6 now.
Yeah, I need to start saying 7 or 6 because that's how old everybody is when they start saying that. Wow. Anyway, there's like 7 or 6 of these mitras there, and I immediately zoomed in on it because like, where they're at, it's in the classical section. I was like, well, wait a second, this is archaic, and that there's even a bell cuirass there in the classical. I'm like, that's also archaic. But then I clicked me, I was like, oh wait, that's right. Crete, Crete is a massive land. It's a huge island. In fact, it has its own 5 different biospheres within the island, which is immaculate.
Oh, does it really? That's wild.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. When I found that out, I was like, that's so cool. And that's true. You can, everywhere I went to, it was a different biosphere. Anyway, even though Crete was a huge island, it's not part of the mainland, and they're a little slower behind the times than the mainland is. You know, the mainland is like, that's your international highway now. Crete is no longer the international highway. It's the it's basically the Dust Bowl. Like, it used to be a huge, cool area, you know, lots of things. And then all of a sudden they hit their storm, if you want to call it that. And now, you know, there's a few people here and there. So they're behind the times when it comes to armor. So they're still wearing like transitional or bell cuirass style armor in the classical period. And then of course we know about these famous Crete archers because, you know, Crete, there's a lot of mountains there and everything, just like Achaia or Achaia, however you want to pronounce it. Achaia. They're in the Peloponnesus, very mountainous area. And so they have a lot of archers that are mercenaries from there. Just like in Crete, there's a lot of mercenaries that are archers in these highlands, these mountainous areas, because they can just aim and shoot downwards. So Crete, the ones that are mercenaries or even just troops that have the armor, they're a little bit behind the times. They're the for instance, we mentioned A Knight's Tale. In A Knight's Tale, when William first shows up to like his first big joust, he's wearing Sir Ector's armor, and then the main bad guy starts with an A. Anyway, he's like, a shield, how quaint. I like your choice of armor. Maybe my grandfather to come back out. Yeah. And
You
he
should
actually
become
does
an
it.
actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. And so it's like, it's an older style armor. And so the mainland Greeks, if they would see these guys wearing that, they're probably gonna be like,
It's interesting because don't we also see similarly in Italy at the same time? We see like lots of the extra bits continually being worn after the mainland drops it.
especially the Etruscans. Yep.
Yeah, the Etruscans are wild. They do whatever the heck they want with their armor. Like,
The Etruscans were like Greeks 2.0.
yeah. So I'm wondering whether is this mainly that most of the combat innovation comes from the mainland and then later spreads to these sort of side areas?
Oh, yeah,
Because that's one of the main things that I think personally we see this, this fully archaic getup exists for a pretty isolated period of time with a pretty distinct like style of warfare. And then once that phalanx really starts to develop and you separate infantry and peltasts and you sort of do all that, you basically progressively see armor become more open and worn less. And it seems that most of these innovations happen from Hellas proper. Then they're sort of settlements abroad and stuff like that. So they are sort of the figureheads of innovation in armor in that sense. Have you just seen Paul's other comment?
Yeah.
I think I know there's a bit of stream delay. That seems a little bit. He seems to suggest that my wealth is from a wealthy lover.
I mean, are you in a Romanos to somebody's Orastes?
No comment.
No. Wait. Is it Paulos?
Moving on swiftly.
Yeah.
Let's see. We had some questions here. I saw about light troops, which is an interesting topic to talk about.
COA were awesome. I love learning about them because like I was always about the phalanx until I learned about like, hey, there's auxiliary troops and they're pretty cool too.
I would honestly love for the phalanx, like the Greek phalanx, to have a bigger peltast and Seloi presence because they are. I mean, as someone coming from a hot plate, I need my people to be throwing stuff around me. But they are such a big part of these battles and often sort of get tossed under the rug when it comes to
60% of the army.
Yeah, like a majority of them, right? And they are your average Joes of the ancient Greek polis. They're your
citizens though.
They are, yes. And you even have some of them. How the name has suddenly escaped from me. They are the sort of were they in Arcadia? Oh my gosh, what are they called? They're like a really famous like mountain tribe, sort of connection to Sparta that were sort of Seloi and peltasts. What am I thinking of?
Well, there is Arcadia, or the Arcadians, but there's also like the Achaeans, which because Arcadia and Achaia are basically in the center of the Peloponnesus, and that's the most like mountainous area. That's just north of Sparta's territory. In fact, Sparta's territory proper is kind of like in a valley. It's in a bowl. It's the biggest farmland, and that's why Sparta was so wealthy, is because they had the biggest farmland available, and they were surrounded by natural, mountains, or natural walls in the mountains. So they didn't have to build a wall around their city because they had a natural one.
I'm just trying to think. There's a really specific. It's annoying me that the names escape my. Yes, the Skiratai.
Skiratai. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Thank
like
you so much.
Run guys. Yeah, those guys are like the scary assassins. Like
they're cool because apparently in Ondas when he's invading Laconia, doesn't he have a run-in with them and it goes quite poorly?
I believe so. I'm not the greatest when it comes to like later classical period stuff. My main, if you want to say bracketology of timeline, is like archaic to the Peloponnesian War. Yes, I do know about the 4th century and stuff like that, but Paul is the guy for Epaminondas because Paul has this like vehement hatred of him.
Paul is
Epaminondas
my
ruins
go-to
Paul.
guy for everything. I don't know how he remembers so much. He remembers all of his little insect details, and then he has this side hustle of being one of the best ancient warfare historians ever, and he just
I
casually does it.
I've mentioned this to him a million times. I think I've mentioned it to you, but I'm going to mention it live on air for once. When I first joined the International Hoplite discussion group on Facebook, and I first got into reenacting and stuff like that, just began my master's in Greece. Like I'm talking maybe week 2, and I tried correcting Paul on something that he was right, made a total fool of myself, total butt. And once he humbled me, and he did it in such a tactful and elegant and graceful manner that it didn't put me down at all, but it definitely opened my eyes up. And I was like, here I am thinking I'm in my master's for Greek warfare and archaeology and stuff like that. And I was being a hoity-toity fool. And then when Paul corrected me, and after that, like you and Paul, like he's one of my best friends. I talk to him all the time. Literally, the job that I have now, I called Paul and spoke with him for about an hour, saying like, "Hey, what do you think of me? Trying to get this job? Should I accept it? What do you think?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, go for it." He goes, "Make that money."
Buy armor,
So
travel.
yeah, and so like, and Paul, Paul and I just wrote a chapter in a book that just came out, talking about HEMA, historical European martial arts and reenactment and stuff like that, and how we can help understand the ancient Greek fighting system and stuff like that. So like Paul, whenever he is on here not watching the Bills, he's one of the greatest gentlemen you guys would ever have the pleasure of meeting.
I agree. And the thing is, he's way too modest. So also bumping
He
up
is.
Paul, yeah, like Paul is one of the. I mean, and I'm so glad that I managed to make some videos in person with Paul as well, especially the destroying the underhand and overhand spear debate and talking about the Orthispos and stuff like that. Is like lots of these things that people take for granted about hoplite warfare as basically being established as gospel originate from Paul and Paul's work. And he's really done a lot of just amazing work in correcting and changing all of these preconceived ideas and scholarly debates. That's one of the things that I often talk about with scholarship, and as you are an official one, is I think a lot of the time academics get caught up in debating other academic camps. Right, you have the sort of the two academic sides, and they bicker between each other. And Paul's just like, "No, you're both wrong. I'll show you." And then he just does it. But he does it in such a way where it's like,
He doesn't put anybody down by
he doesn't
doing
put anyone down, but he also does it in a way that's like, I'm not saying anything is categorically fact. All I'm doing is showing that what you've said can be done, or what you said cannot be done, or this works far better. He does it in a really, really great way.
I like that. Bills getting beat by Denver. I live on the western side of Colorado now, basically next to Utah. So like, I'm a Titans fan, Tennessee Titans. I'm from Southeast Missouri. Yeah, I should have been a Rams fan, but no, I just always had the Titans. Guess what? They're Greek inspired. Hey, what do I study? Anyway, I should in a way be a Denver Broncos fan now. And for today and today only, I'm a Broncos fan. Sorry, Bills. I think Josh Allen's overrated, but that's a conversation for a different topic.
See, as a British Canadian sat over here, I don't even understand what you guys are talking about.
Yeah,
Now, we've got a question here, which is a great question. Would either of you consider consulting for Hollywood movies? I would absolutely love to do this.
Yeah.
As long as it's not Ridley Scott, where he then doesn't listen to anything that we say. But 100%. I did a video on it a while ago. There's a movie that's being produced by a Greek director, and it's being filmed on the Battle of Marathon. And a friend of mine, who Apostles Films, I think is how you pronounce his name. He knows the guy as well, and I did a video about it, and unfortunately didn't go anywhere. But I would absolutely love to give some historical advice to filmmakers, big or small, Hollywood or non-Hollywood, that want to do ancient movies, especially of course warfare movies. I think that'd be awesome.
So I had the privilege and luxury of, during my undergraduate, my Roman history professor, he was the historical consultant for the TV show Spartacus.
Oh, really?
He was good friends with the original actor of Spartacus before, he passed away, unfortunately. Um, way too young. Anyway, my professor, he told me how it happened. He goes, Ben, he goes, I'm telling you right now, you don't get to choose to do it. He goes, you luck into it. He said that during his master's, because he specializes in Roman sport and spectacle, so gladiators, the Colosseum, and stuff like that. I mean, he's Dr. Jeffrey Stevens is also one of the greatest gentlemen I have had the pleasure of knowing. I've had like 5 of his classes. He's a wonderful academic. He's given me so many pointers and stuff like that. I mean, and he's been a huge follower of mine, and he's always rooting for me to do well. And so thank you for Dr. Stevens if you ever get a chance to watch this. But Dr. Stevens, he told me that during his master's, he just he was at a lecture and he went outside on a smoke break. And one of the gentlemen there was like, "Hey, are you Jeff?" He's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Your professor, I went to him and asked him if he'd be willing to work on this TV show I'm working on with HBO. He said that he's too busy, but he recommended you. Would you like to be on our TV show talking about, Spartacus and filling in the year that he went on his huge campaign that like we really don't know much about and stuff like that? Would you be willing to fill in those details?" And my friend was like, yeah. And so he even got to sneak in a couple lines here and there that the actors got to speak because it was reference to something like Sulla, for instance, who was, if anybody knows anything about Roman history, Sulla was one of the patrician generals that basically invaded and conquered Rome after the Marian reforms because he was a big adversary of Marius. And so he's like, Rome is not Rome anymore. Come on, boys, let's go invade it and turn it back to Rome. And he did. And there was, he sacked Rome as a Roman citizen. I digress. There's a reference to it that Dr. Stevens makes in the TV show. But yeah, the point being is that a lot of times you kind of luck into it. You either have to have somebody who's already been working in the film industry to suggest you if you're one of their favorites, or you just happen to catch somebody on a smoke break and you're talking about it and be like, hey, I just happen to be someone knowledgeable about this.
That's a crazy story, actually. That's funny.
I asked Dr. Stevens, like, if anybody ever brings anything Greek to you, he goes, they're not. I'm Roman. Good try. All right. I tried.
Well, it's my new life goal is to get Benny to be a historical advisor for a film, and then proceed to not listen to him at all and make what the Odyssey has done as the runner.
The actual historical consultant for the TV for I think it was Ridley Scott's Gladiator, she actually had her name taken off of the credits because it was a part of my language about a bastardization of the actual history that happened. Me personally, Commodus was not as bad as what people think he was. He was a product of his environment. When your own mother and sister try to unalive you, I can understand being kind of vindictive and petty and angry.
My thing with Ridley Scott and was it for Napoleon, where he was basically like, why should I trust historians? Were they there? And I'm like, I don't understand this. The guy wants to make historical films. That's basically, apart from Alien, that's basically what he's famous for. Yet he despises historian advice. And one thing I sort of find funny is the first battle scene in Gladiator, which I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, they actually filmed decently close to where I used to live. I'm pretty sure that was filmed in England. I think. I might be completely misremembering this. But anyways, it was getting cleared for construction, and they used it as a battlefield. But the actual armor of the legionaries isn't terrible in that first film. Like, the shields are about right, the helmets are about right, the armors are about right. But I love the first Gladiator film, and that's one of my films. Like, that's like 300. I view that film as a comic book movie. It's like one of those films that, like, every time I watch it, I will really enjoy it. I wasn't a big fan of the second one, the second Gladiator film. I really wasn't a fan of Napoleon. I was really excited to watch Napoleon. That was like my main. I really wanted to watch, and I watched it, and I was just sort of like, oh, that was it.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, Joaquin Phoenix, I think is a fantabulous actor. I actually really loved his Commodus too, especially the part where like you're watching the Gladiator scene, going back to the Gladiator movie he did, when he's watching like all the gladiators being unalived. I hate that we have to say that, but anyway, and he's just like, nah. Like that was so like because it makes you think about how I don't want to say insane, but he's really trying to portray Commodus in such a way. And I think doing that it shows his bloodthirsty side and his admiration for gladiators and such like that. You know, and the blood, guts, and gore. And it's like, ha ha. And then his Napoleon is very. I didn't think he did a bad job as Napoleon. I thought he was, fairly stoic and everything like that. And I'm glad that he portrayed him because, contrary to popular belief, Napoleon was not short. He was actually taller than most people of his time. He just happened to ride the largest freaking horse there was, and also, it made him look itty bitty.
Doesn't a lot of that come from a British propagandist cartoonist that basically depicted him as really, really short?
Yep.
That's one of my favorite legacies that's been stained is that, Napoleon's short. Meanwhile, Napoleon standing like 5'10" is like, oi.
When everybody else is like 5'7". Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a question that somebody mentioned. It was like Princess of Flonia or something like that. If you fought a Cyclops IRL, you probably want a Sarissa or a longer spear than the traditional Dory, right? I would say yes, because you got to keep in mind, mono-eyed, even people modern days, like, they only have one eye because they lost vision and stuff like that, right? Whether they were born with one eye or they lost it somehow, their depth perception in one eye, it's not as great as if you have two. Your eyes, because the way your eyes are actually created, at any given moment, you actually see your nose, right? But the way your eyes can join together, you don't see it, or you don't, unless you focus on it and go cross-eyed. But your eyes work together in a way to where it helps filter your actual depth. And if one eye is stronger than the other, your depth perception can be kind of off. In fact, like I wear glasses, you wear glasses. Without my glasses, everything's slightly blurry.
My vision's crap.
And like my depth perception, I can see things that they look like they're a little closer than what they actually are. And then when I put my glasses on, I was like, oh wait, that's actually further away. Now that my vision's cleared up. Same thing with, mono-eyed people, right? Or Polyphemus, the Cyclops. His depth perception is not going to be as great as if we had two eyes. And so when they blinded Polyphemus, it was with a really large poking stick that they had also infected with goat manure, and they burned the end first to get it, like cauterize it, and then they rolled it around in manure and stuff like that, and they jabbed it into him. But it took, what was it, like 12 guys lifting this skewer to jab it in his eye. And it may not have been 12 guys, but it took a lot of men to actually do it. And Odysseus, even as cunning as he is a king, and he is nobility, and he's very arrogant and haughty because he's the one who he purposely made himself be the first man in line, because he's purposely putting himself in danger because he wants a story of, I am the one to blind Polyphemus. I am the one that faced him. And of course, later, whenever he's leaving Polyphemus, Polyphemus is like, the giants are like, or the Cyclopes are like, oh, Polyphemus, what has happened to you? What's going on? Are you hurt? No one is hurting me. No one is harming me. That very famous no one, the Udes or Udemia. And so, and then of course, Odysseus, he's like, haha, it is I, Odysseus, which was his downfall. So as smart as Odysseus is, he is still a king. He is still haughty. He's still arrogant. And that was his almost fatal mistake. It was fatal for his men. It cost his men their lives. But as smart as he is and as brave as he is, he's still very arrogant. And I know that was like 3 tangents in one. But if I was facing a Cyclops in person, 2 things. One, I want the biggest stick as possible because I don't want to be up close and personal with him. And especially I want to avoid his mouth because Polyphemus has a taste for human flesh. So I would want a Sarissa or some really long pointy stick, or bow and arrow.
Or a bow. I think I would choose a bow, to be honest. Yeah. Now, with this fun little situation, I always have this thing where it's sort of funny. It's like in the new Stranger Things season, spoilers if anyone hasn't seen that. But when like the big monster mind flayer at the end can't catch up to them who are running away when it's the size of a shopping mall, it's like, why is it that like one stride is like 2 kilometers by this thing? But anyways, I feel like the Cyclops would actually be a lot faster than you as well, in the sense that it would scale ground a lot more. So I feel like even if you have a Sarissa, let's be honest, that thing could probably snap it if it wanted to. and it would catch up to you.
But if it's skinny enough and his depth perception's off, and you have it like,
It's like a mosquito. He's trying to smack it.
yeah,
But I think my strat would be try and shoot his eye with a bow. That would be my strat. I used to do archery, so I just go back to my good old younger days of doing archery and just try and shoot his eye.
I had like a kid's bow and everything like that, and I am a hunter. I love hunting. So if I had a rifle, then hey, we're perfect because I'm gonna be a couple hundred yards away. I don't have to worry about anything. I'll just shoot him wherever.
If I was fighting a Cyclops, I'd grab my RPG and I'd just shoot him in the face. Yeah. Well, that's great. Problem solved, really, isn't it?
Fun fact: I have actually, because I was in the Army, I have actually used the AT-4 rocket propelled grenade, which is fun. It was my casual, not so casual flex. Just be like, cool. I use big firearms.
That is fun. There we go. Okay, let's pay one more visit to the comments, and then I think I'm going to call it a wrap because I'm actually quite hungry. I haven't eaten much today,
and it's getting close to dinner, and I kind of want to see the Broncos beat the Bills.
So we have, someone said that Kingdom of Heaven was even worse. I actually also haven't watched Kingdom of Heaven. This is a film. I know this is a film that I've had on my bucket list for ages to watch, but I just haven't gotten around to. I don't watch a lot of TV. It's one of my things.
And I'm the old man.
Yeah, you are 30. Ugh. Yeah, I know. It sounds like Ridley Scott wants to rewrite history to suit his own ideologies and ego, and that's probably the problem with Nolan now too. Yeah, I feel like he does sort of use that. And this is something that I find interesting. Is we have a comment down here from I'll just say Detox. So he says that, or she says. I have worked in the film industry, and it's quite hard to make a historical film that's accurate and entertaining at the same time. Filmmakers focus more on making the film more entertaining so it sells. This is something that I find interesting because to me, some of the most epic and wow, this would make an amazing story are real historical events or real historical battles that I personally find far more interesting than the movie version of them. For instance, the real Battle of Thermopylae, I think, is actually a far more complex and interesting story than the movie. Or, for instance, the Battle of Plataea, a massively interesting battle with loads of twists and turns. And oh my gosh, this has happened. They have to try and pull back. Oh no, the pulling back goes wrong, and they get cut off. And their water supply gets cut off. A really interesting battle that has stakes after stakes after stakes getting raised. I of course understand filmmakers having to do some exaggeration, but I'll use Nolan's Odyssey as an example here. I don't see why having armor that represents the historical culture better. Again, I'm not even asking for one-to-one accuracy. I never have when I've talked about the Odyssey. Just something that isn't, brown and black. I don't see why doing something like that would make it more entertaining or sell more than something that visually looks better. I would die on the hill that all historical hotplate armor looks cooler than the stuff being represented in the Odyssey. So that's sort of a question that I have is especially as we've worked in the film industry, why is it deemed that having something that is historically accurate in that sense is deemed as not being able to entertain, not being able to sell, instead of actually taking these historical stories that are really interesting, and some of them have really heroic aspects or really heartbreaking aspects, and making a more accurate or respectful adaptation of those? Or if you want to do fictional stuff inspired by historical periods, what is the big problem with representing the people as they, or more like they would have been in that period? That's just a question that I sort of have with that.
And can we please get rid of the Vambrace thing? The leather arm guards? Not a thing.
Unless we're talking about archaic hoplites, in which case, a little bit.
Yeah, but it wasn't leather.
No, I don't like the leather Vambrace things. But anyways, yeah, because that's one thing that I found interesting with the Odyssey is I've had a lot of people, this is going to be my final tangent before I call it a night. It's clear that they just never watched my videos on the Odyssey. They see someone's critiquing the Odyssey and they start keyboard warrioring me. I feel like I give a very fair analysis of the Odyssey in my critiquing, if I dare say so myself, in the sense that I praise it where it did stuff right. I say areas that I wish that they did better. And overall, I'm quite fair with it. And people seem to like to straw man all my arguments massively and say that I say something I don't, or assume that I'm taking other stances I haven't said. But yeah, one of the things that people often said to me with that was, if Christopher Nolan made the armor accurate, no one would go and watch the film. I just really don't get that. And I actually think if a filmmaker did this, like Christopher Nolan, who has a good reputation, of saying, I have filmed on location where I can. I've filmed on the open sea. I have not used green screen. I've used loads of practical effects. I've wanted to film where this is. And I've recreated the armor of the, Trojan War or the archaic Greece. I feel like that could be a massive selling point for the film, personally. I think loads of people would be like, wow, Christopher Nolan recreated the filming locations and the actual armor of the time. That's really cool. And I actually think that it would get more advertisement and more press for being like the first film to do this than going the generic Hollywood route. So I think that that's an interesting question to ask, is why Paul's the one. We can't look at the chat when we're talking, because Paul just
I need to exit out of the chat.
I can just imagine him writing that and just as he presses enter. I also love, because he's watching the stream. He must not be quite up to date. He's like watching the stream 10 minutes behind, because he's talking about the Polyphemus thing. But anyways, yeah, going back to that thing, it's something that I've always found interesting, is why is it that filmmakers assume that representing stuff accurately would stop people or dissuade people from watching? I don't really understand that.
And I do think that in this regard, so we focus, we are hyper focused on the armor because that's what you and I study, right? In fact, like, one thing for people that are watching this, one thing I've told Adam time and time again, ad nauseum, he's probably tired of hearing me say this, is that the only thing that really separates myself and Adam is that A, I know ancient Greek, the language, and B, I have a piece of paper. Other than that, Adam is probably more of a scholar than I am. And I spent 9 years in school to get a piece of paper. Adam is the GOAT. He and Paul are top notch. Like, I have something that says I specialize in Greece. Adam and Paul have actual working capabilities that show their expertise and how they, like, their own curriculum vitae, where they've worked to be where they're at. And anybody who would ever take away from Adam, I will say I'm standing in front of him and you can fight me first. But in the regard to this armor thing, so the Iliad, yes, I think if this was a story about the Iliad, I want to see like the most outlandish, like historically accurate, but outlandish, beautiful armors there are, because this is a story of war. This is an actual fighting. The Odyssey, however, as went back to, this is going to be a whole circle around thing, is a nostos. It's a return journey. It's not about war. Yeah, he's a warrior and he's wearing armor, but we also know that he loses his armor. He loses all of his troops. Spoiler alert. I know I'm like 3,000 years too late.
Spoiling this 3,000-year-old poem for me, Benny.
What's that?
Ridiculous. I said you're spoiling this nearly 3,000-year-old poem for me.
But like, when he gets back to Ithaca, he doesn't have any of his regalia. He doesn't have his armor. He doesn't have anything. It's just him and his clothes washed up on land. And people think that he's a beggar and an old man. They have, like, even whenever he does finally get himself revealed, when Athena lifts her spell on him to show Odysseus in his full-fledged form, Madeline Miller's Circe does a beautiful representation of it. If you've never read it, it's one of my favorite books, and she did such a fantastic. Her first book, Song of Achilles, is great, but Madeline Miller's Circe, beautiful, because they talk about how, like, Odysseus, he is essentially a demigod. His great grandfather is Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And in fact, Hermes is one of his patron deities, and Athena being the main one, but Hermes has an invested interest in Odysseus. Anyway, Circe mentions that, like, before the war, Odysseus was probably this very handsome, maybe short in stature, but this very handsome, kind of stocky built man. But then whenever he shows up on her island and stays with her for a year, she's noticing all of his, like, scars in his arms and his legs, and how one of his legs is kind of like bent a little bit because he probably got cut on one of his tendons, and whenever it healed, it didn't fully heal right. So he probably has a slight, maybe not quite limp, but you can see that he's older and worn torn, and that his beard is turning gray. Even though when Odysseus and all these men went to Troy and fight, they're in their teens and late 20s or early 20s, teens to late 20s, that area. So there's about a decade or so of men, with the exception of, old Nestor and stuff like that. But generally speaking, all the people that were supposed to be the suitors for Helen that made this agreement proposed by Odysseus, this pact that like whoever marries Helen, if she ever disappears, whatever, the rest of the suitors would help that her husband get her back. Greeks married young. Achilles, when Achilles was unalived and passed away, he was probably 27, 28 theoretically. By the time Odysseus gets to Circe, he's already did 10 years in the Trojan War. He probably left when he was, let's just say he's 22. 10 years later, he's now 32, but he's got these gray hairs. And if you can probably tell him, like, I'm almost 31. I've got gray hair here. I've got a couple in here. Like, I'm starting to get a little bit of salt and pepper. But with the constant 10 years of war, he's aging. In fact, there's pictures. There's one of my most saddening and heartfelt pictures that I've ever seen was a side-by-side of a British soldier who went to war during World War I when he was 18. And then 4 years later, whenever he got back, he looked like he was probably 50 years old. I mean, you can see how much life was drained from him from this war. So you spend 10 years in war in your 20s, and now you're gray and, you're covered in scars, and, your voice is a little raspy. Like, your demeanor is a little bit more like angry. In fact, spoiler alert for the end of the Odyssey, going into the history of Odysseus. Odysseus dies. No, duh, right? But eventually Odysseus is killed by his own son, the son he has with Circe, Telegonus, which his name means the last child, or the last child of Odysseus. But when he dies, it's because after he gets back to Ithaca, Odysseus suffers from severe, and I mean severe, PTSD. Like, he thinks that there's enemies all around him. He becomes a tyrant on Ithaca to the point where it scares even Penelope, and his own son, Telemachus, is terrified by him. And then Telegonus shows up on Ithaca, and Odysseus thinks that Telegonus is a pirate. And Telegonus is trying to tell him, no, I'm not. I'm looking for Odysseus. And Odysseus is like, well, why are you trying to find Odysseus? Are you trying to, take his throne and become the new king and the husband of Penelope? Which, spoiler alert again, Telegonus does end up marrying Penelope in the end. But it's this, he suffers from severe PTSD, and in a fit of rage and misunderstanding, Telegonus, he kills his own father. He doesn't mean to. He didn't realize it was his own father until after the fact, when Telemachus tells him that was Odysseus that you just unalived. And the Telegonus, who spent all of his life trying to find his dad and hearing all these stories about how great of a man he is, and his first and final interactions with him is his own dad was trying to unalive him. And in the end, he unalives his own dad. It's very tragic that everybody stops at the Odyssey where Odysseus comes home. They don't realize that he still has another years of his life where he has to go, I think it was like Ephesus or something like that, and pray to Artemis and stuff, be washed away of his sins. And then he spends the last few years of his life screaming and seeing enemies where there aren't any. And he becomes this almost evil tyrant because he's in this constant mode of, he spent the greatest years of his life, he spent at sea or at war, and he's tired and he's scared and he's just suffering. I mean, that's what it is. It's very sad. In Greek mythology, very rarely do heroes get a good end.
Yeah, they are often tragedies. All right, with that was a great wrap up. Thank you so much, Benny, for coming on. It was really, really great to have you on. I had a great time. Thanks to everyone who tuned into the stream. Thanks for Paul for answering loads of questions that we didn't get to in the chat. That was great. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I really had a good time. And I will hopefully be back making videos again this coming week. And who knows, maybe we'll get Benny once again on the channel, at least make him come to more live streams, and we will get Paul away from his family and away from his sports games to be on here as well. So thanks very much, and we'll hopefully catch you in the next one.
And Valerian, yes, it is from the Greek myths, not the actual Odyssey itself. Anyway, but yes, thank you, Adam, so much for having me on. I had a great time. I loved it. I know I went on every single tirade, but it's when everything connects.
Benny's just like been itching to say all this stuff. And
I've been inviting Adam for months now.
Anyways, all right. Have a good morning, afternoon, or night, wherever the heck you are. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.